What's up, and welcome back to the neighborhood, and thank you for spending part of your day with us today. If you're a returning listener, or if this is your first time here, thank you so much for listening. On this episode, we're talking about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a PlayStation exclusive, so of course Dylan has not played it. That being the case, it only made sense for me to bring back the same guest that I had for our Final Fantasy VII Remake episode. A very special guest, man who cannot tell time, also our 500th subscriber on YouTube, Caleb Van Ice.
Hello.
Caleb?
Yes, the 500th subscriber thing is because I didn't know I wasn't. Your stuff pops up in my feed all the time. Like, yeah, of course, subscribed. And then when you posted that, I went over there and I'm like, oh, is it that close? Maybe I can share it or something. I looked and it said, do you want to subscribe? I went, oh, yeah. Let me do that real quick.
Yeah, when Dylan texted me that, he was like, you want to know who our 500th subscriber was? I was like, who? He's like, it was Caleb. I was like, yeah, that for some reason that's on brand.
That's I'm late to everything. No,
yeah. It makes sense. Like I mentioned before, we are talking about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on this episode. You could maybe even consider it a part 2 to our Final Fantasy VII Remake episode we released not too long ago. The way we're going to structure this episode as far as spoilers is we'll talk spoiler-free for the first section as far as we get with that, and then there'll be a spoiler warning and some music from the game, and then we'll shift into full spoilers after that. Once we finish discussing spoilers, we'll come out of our spoiler section into our verdicts, and there will be timestamps for all of this in the podcast description, so if you want to just skip ahead to our verdicts, feel free. I feel like this is going to be a big one, so let's go ahead and just dive right into it.
I also feel like it's going to be a fun one, because unlike the last one, where I feel like you and I had I liked it more, but like we had similar wavelength, I feel we're kind of on opposite sides of this one, not necessarily like extremely opposite, but like you, from our discussions earlier, you're pretty mixed on it as a whole. And
yes.
I think it's one of the greatest video games ever made. So it's
it's going to be an interesting conversation. I haven't fully landed on a verdict. I'm hoping this conversation will get me there.
Get you there. Yeah.
Before we kick into it, Caleb, if you had to give somebody who didn't know what this game was a slightly longer than an elevator pitch, but not like a full chapter book description of what this game is, what would you tell them?
I would basically tell them that 30 years ago, they made a very, very popular, very, very well-regarded RPG named Final Fantasy VII, and everyone loved it, and also almost immediately everyone said, it's really good. However, it came out at just the right time to where the graphics kind of were like, I like them, I find them charming, but they are like the first 3D game they ever made, sort of like clunky patchwork sort of thing. Immediately, like Final Fantasy VIII looks so much better. Final Fantasy IX looks gorgeous. It's like 7, while being everyone's favorite. It's like, if you ever wanted to remake this, please do. Finally, they broke down and did, because it became, over time, the most demanded remake of all time. They just did it as a trilogy. So this is the middle part of a trilogy, remaking one game from 30 years ago in a completely different style.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. Remake was the Midgar section, and I mean, I guess we can go ahead and just start here. The difference in
scope,
but like scenery and tone and everything between Remake and Rebirth, with the exception of some story beats, I guess. It feels like Dylan was talking to me the other day and was like, everything I saw from Remake, like from the outside looking in, is it's this kind of gritty, like steampunk, whatever, fighting the corporation thing. And then everything I've seen from this game is like ridiculous.
Yes. No.
Like beach party. Like, this is our beach episode, our cruise ship episode. Like,
no, this is, I had this conversation with Alex as it was building up to the game, where I said, I can really, really tell in most people's brains, the stuff they remember the most about Final Fantasy VII is like the first 10 hours. Because like Rebirth is actually more of a remake of Final Fantasy VII than Remake was. Like, Rebirth is the actual Final Fantasy VII for the most part, which includes weird things like old Final Fantasy games. Like, I'm actually in the middle of playing for the first time Final Fantasy I, and I'm having a lot of fun with it because I know what it is, and I came in mentally prepared.
You're playing Final Fantasy 1 and 16?
Yes, it's a very funny contrast. It's very funny because 16 does like a lot of callbacks, and I'm like, I know what they're doing here, actually.
I'm just going to play Stranger of Paradise eventually someday.
Yeah, I kind of want to. I don't think it's going to be good, but I am very interested because, like, now that I know what the story for 1 is, Stranger of Paradise being like a kind of alternate universe prequel to it is like, that's weird. I want to see why they did that. But playing through the original Final Fantasy, the old Final Fantasy games are straight up just Dungeons and Dragons. It is the most like generic Dungeons and Dragons. It's Final Fantasy, so it's still insane. Like, the plot of the first Final Fantasy literally involves time travel. Like, to get halfway through the game, and it's like, well, now you actually have to go back in the past just because this guy did this and everything, and there's a stable time loop you guys have to solve. And I'm like, you guys just invented this series, and you already cannot be normal. But otherwise, the early games are straight up, you go to a town, you poke around and ask people where, like, go ask the person in the bar, like, hey, is there anything going on around here? And they're like, well, we heard the caves over there have a monster living. You go over, fight the monster. You go fight a bunch of guys so you can earn coins. You can buy gear to fight the monster better. It's very basic. It's a lot of fun once you get into its rhythm, but it is no frills that. The middle section of Final Fantasy VII, which is what this game is adapting, is one of the last holdovers of that old style of thing where it's like, you had your cool intro, eventually we'll tie up all the story threads. For now, though, just go bum around to these different towns, see if there's anything to do, and see if you can pick up the next plot thread, maybe like, oh, let's go check this out or whatnot. So what that leads to, and this is a thing, I love it, but this is a thing where I can't understand why people are like, what is this? Is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is doing a new thing every 2 hours. Some of it doesn't really go anywhere. Some of it's just like, hey, do this. And you're like, okay. And then you get on the other side of it and you're like, that seemed like I was running in circles for a little bit. I don't know why we did that. And like I said, I just like these characters. I had a great time with it. I can see because with the exception of some of the padding we talked about last time in Remake moves. Remake makes everything feel urgent and like, you have to go, you have to go, you have to go. This is, I think, the big downside to their whole, we're doing it as a trilogy. Like, you can see why when you get into especially Rebirth and you're like, oh, yeah, if they made it like this all as one game, it would be 400 hours long. So, like, I get it. But the downside is this feels like the middle chunk where you're wandering around before you start building up to where, like, the end game stuff. And so, like, the plot literally takes a backseat for about half of the game. There is a chunk where, like, you start out, you're going in a certain direction, and the direction is figure out what's going on with these guys, and you go, okay, and then you kind of just run around the entire continent for, like, the middle chunk of the game, and only in, like, the last third of it do I go, okay, so now we can start picking up more on these threads and start heading back in the direction of where we're ending this game, and then the next game is going to be almost entirely like a straight line to the end.
Well, and everything they do in Rebirth story-wise is like, okay, this town/area is going to kind of focus on this side character.
Yes.
And like their background a little bit.
The big thing about it, like the big thing about Rebirth, as like you can tell from the top down, their whole thing is the connection between these characters. And so a big change they made is like, okay, we are going to spotlight every single character, the entire game, down to like how the side quests work, how anything works is just about fleshing out these characters. So yes, everyone gets a turn at being the main character for a little bit, sort of. So yeah, they even flesh out some stuff that isn't in the original. They do add a bunch of extra stuff, or they add in stuff from like the tie-in stuff later, like Crisis Core and whatnot, which I'm sure we'll get to, because I mentioned when we did the last one of these that I had just started Crisis Core, beat it, loved it. It is very funny in that for all of its weird translation and clunkiness, the original Final Fantasy VII is genuinely, I think, one of the greatest video game stories ever made. Crisis Core is like, you know, when you go see a really good movie, they make a sequel, It only has some of the same actors, and it was clearly made on a much lower budget. And like you watch it and you're like, the writing in this is actually kind of bad. Like the core story is good, but like there's a handful of clunky lines in Remake and Rebirth. But for the most part, like you get a sense of the characters, you get a sense of like, you're like, this is clunky, but like normal. Every line of dialogue in Crisis Core is like the doofiest thing you've ever heard. It's so funny. I loved it so much. But again, you kind of have to get on that one's wavelength. But they do some really nice payoffs for stuff that I'm like, I didn't know about that character. I didn't know about this thing. And then they weave it into Remake and especially Rebirth. Rebirth, it's very funny. There's a couple elements in Rebirth where I'm like, I can both tell they wanted you to play the Crisis Core remake that just came out before this. But it's also funny because there's a big plot twist that they are saving for the third one. That if you play Crisis Core, you know what the answer is. Like you already know. You're going to play this game and be like, yeah, that's what happened. I don't know why there's some big mystery about it. Like this is, I've seen it. I've seen it happen. So it's a funny little juggling they do that I'm not always, I need to see the third game. I need to see how they tie all of this together because I'm like, right now they have a lot of balls in the air. I love a lot of it, but there's some stuff I'm like, this is either to be really interesting or kind of bad, depending on how they pay it off next time.
Yeah. The story...
I think it's best to look at this story as almost the first half of Season 2 of Avatar The Last Airbender, where it's like, we're not into the endgame stuff yet. We've gotten everything established. This is the part of the story where everyone kind of like, we meet a couple new people and we kind of stick around for like a couple dozen episodes until we start winding back up.
Yeah, I think because it was so long, I started losing because basically like they're following the hooded men and like that is what is pulling that's the one tie to the overarching story and that works, but they're doing so much other stuff in between and it's like there's a ton of it's front loaded with story and like crazy character moments and like backstory and like
right,
and then it's like backloaded with a ton of like the main plot, but the middle is just like
I will tell everyone this, my completion time, like from start to finish, and I did luxuriate quite a bit. I did take my time. I was having a great time. So I'm like, originally I was like, I'm going to mainline it and then maybe do stuff afterwards. I was having such a great time that I did kind of do probably about 80% of the not including end game, like post game kind of stuff, but I did do about 80% of those various side quests and stuff during my game time. So let me put it this way. My playtime when I finished the game, like when I rolled credits and saved at the rolling credits, was just over. It was like 100 hours and 40 minutes or something like that. The middle 50 hours is not what I would call filler, but it is just stuff that is not essential to like if you're only caring about like the plot does take a vacation for the middle chunk of it. It just they're like
quite literally.
Yeah, literally. That one's very funny because that's one of my favorite chunks in the entire game. That is one screen and like they go to Costa del Sol. They have like it's one section on the map. There's a hotel you can check into. There's like a brief story thing that happens there, and then you move on to Coral, the Coral region, and then eventually to the Golden Saucer. But like in the original game, Costa del Sol is mainly just like, oh, it's kind of funny that because the game you'll also notice goes in like a rhythms of like industrial and then classical fantasy, industrial and then classical fantasy. Like you'll go through wilderness, but then through like, oh shoot, I'm blanking on the name. The city they go to with the coronation and all that stuff. I can't remember its name. It's literally, I'm gonna be so mad. Nope, not coming. Junon, when they go to Junon.
Oh, right.
You go through that. And so you get used to like, oh, I was just in Junon. And then you get to Coastal. So it's like, oh, it's funny. They've got like a beach town, like a Miami in this fantasy world. That's kind of funny. And then you move on. And here it is genuinely like a 6-hour, 7-hour chunk of the game. Like there's actually for the most part very combat light. It's just having the characters hang out. You do a couple little mini games,
driving around on like segways.
Yeah, you do just all sorts of goofy hanging out stuff, and then it's like, all right, but now they go back to their adventure after they do some stuff here.
Yeah, it's something I was talking about on the podcast, I think.
I think it was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Well, I talked about it on an episode that is not out at the time of recording, but will be out right before this. Well, not right before that. Will be out before this.
Yeah.
Where it's like I've kind of, I guess, noticed this pattern with like JRPGs where it's similar to anime where things are kind of like arc based. And so you have arcs. It was similar in Final Fantasy 16, but I felt more pulled to keep moving in that game. Like I would get to the end of an arc in Rebirth and be like, you know what? That's pretty good. Like you're talking about Costa del Sol, and I had to force myself to, like, I got there and then I put the game down, and then every time I'd pick it back up, it was kind of like, I don't really feel like doing the silly steps required to like unlock my bathing suit right now.
Right.
And so I kept like putting that off, and then one evening I was like, I need to get past this step. And as soon as I did and things started moving again, like I played a big long chunk of the game again. But it was like every time I would hit that ending of an arc point, I'd be like, I'm good for now.
Yeah. And I do think in some ways it's not actually a bad way to play it because it is so long. Like I knew it was long when I bought it, and I do not normally play long games, but I was like, I'm really excited for this. I'll sit down for it. But there was a point, even like I said, I was enjoying my time. I took my time. I did all the little different side quests. There was a point where I was like 70 hours in, and I'm like, I'm not going to lie to you, even as dragging my feet as I've been, and even as long as I'm like, I kind of thought I'd be a lot closer to the end by now, and I'm like, no, I still got a good bit of time left. I did actually something kind of similar to yours. I was always playing it, like it was just for the month and a half after it came out. That was just my thing. I'd come home from work and play like a couple hours of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I had a different thing. I did play it in those kind of chunks, but what I would do is I would play to the end of, say, an arc, and then I had kind of like cordoned off my chunks of time. So like I'd do the bare minimum story stuff for like the grasslands, and then I'd move on to Junon, and then I'd move on to Costa del Sol. And then after I did the Costa del Sol stuff, I went back and did all the side stuff for the grasslands. Like I went back and did all the side quests and all the little treasure hunts and stuff like that. And then I'd go do the next chunk of the plot. And then the next time they opened up fast travel, I went back to Junon and did all the little side quests and stuff like that and whatnot. And then I went back to the next chunk of the plot. And then the next time they gave me fast travel again, I went all the way back to Costa del Sol and did all the little side stuff.
I did that exact same thing for like the first 3 areas, mostly because I was feeling like I needed to for levels and stuff, like just to make the game a little easier.
If there is something I would tell someone who hasn't played the game, it's like Chadley's training missions. You might be like, no, I know what I'm doing. Like I've played a couple bits of this and it's like, I'm pretty good. It's like, no, go play his VR battles early on anyway. Cause they're not usually terribly difficult. But A, it's just some extra of the combat system. And we talked about last time, I love the combat system. They made it even better here. But B, you get a bunch of really handy materia because I put off those for a while because I was like, I'm doing plenty of battles just doing my side content and the main story. Maybe I'll go in and do this later, but like I don't need these now until I got like 30 hours in, and then I checked for something at the VR missions, and I realized, oh, there's a bunch of materia you can only get through here, and some of it's incredibly handy. So then I sunk a bunch of time into that as well. Just because there also gets to be a point where like you'll get some materia just in the normal course of playing, but they stop giving you new ones pretty quickly at the shops and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And also like as your party starts growing, you get kind of tired of juggling the same 2 fire materia. And it's like, oh, well, it turns out if you just do like 5 of Chadley's things, you'll get 2 materia you've never heard before, and then 3 free fire materias that are pretty like already like at level 2. So it's just like, I just slot those in. It's like, awesome. I don't have to think about this as much anymore.
Yeah, and kind of going off that, like we talked a lot in Remake, our episode about Remake, about like kind of just the basics of combat and the materia and how all that functions. In this game, they reworked a lot of the systems, and I remember feeling when I started the game up pretty overwhelmed by just all of the systems and menus. They changed like how weapon leveling works. I was at first
I got used to it, and I, for the most part, like it. I was kind of mad at first with the weapon leveling system.
Yeah, I liked it in Remake.
Yeah, I liked the aspect where like each weapon had its own special move, and it's you use that weapon, used that special move enough with that weapon, you mastered it and then had it for any weapon. Like, so you could just, now that was just an attack Cloud had no matter what sword he was using instead of explicitly that sword. But that took me way too long to figure out that that's how it worked. Because I'd get a sword and I'd use the special move and I was like, this is great. And then I'd get the next sword and it had better stats. So I equipped the next sword. And I'm like, oh, that move went away. Well, I'll figure it out or whatnot. And there did get to be a point where I was like, oh, hang on. I have to really go quickly grind with these old crummy weapons so I can unlock their special move so I can use them with like Tifa's gloves. She gets like 80 hours in.
They did that in Remake though too.
Yeah, but again, I didn't really use that as much because I used the
That was the only reason I like made Cloud use the baseball bat for a while was to get the move.
Yeah, see, I didn't realize that because in that I focused a lot of my time on each weapon had its own skill tree. Basically, you remember that with the little, and they does not have that in this one. You have basically like each weapon has some slots that you get to choose like 3 stat bonuses or 2 stat bonuses depending on each weapon, and it's like pick what stat bonuses you want to go on this weapon. And they're bespoke for each weapon. So it's not like there's 27 stat bonuses for any weapon and you can just slot 3 in. It's like you have 8 options. You can pick 3 of them. And so sometimes the options are like attack bonus, magic bonus, this effect, that effect, health bonus. And sometimes it's like you can actually just put 3 attack bonuses on this and make this one specific gun of Barrett like stupid powerful if you want. You don't have to, but you can.
Yeah, no, they changed that. They added a like synergy ability to combat where like teammates can assist each other in fights, and along with that came kind of another skill tree for every character. Some of the skills in that skill tree would just be like abilities or bonuses for that character, but then some of them would unlock like special synergy moves. So they had that. They had the materia was back, so it still kind of functioned the same as the first game. And then they had the like you said, the party size just growing. So on top of the new mechanics that they've added, you're also kind of juggling. You can only still actively play as 3 people in a party. So it's like, well, I have 3 different loadouts for my party that I want to use. And then you have like assists that can come in from the people on the sidelines. And so like right out of the gate, there's a ton they've added that they throw at you.
They do. Like I said, I think it's better once you get used to it. But it is funny. In a lot of ways, Remake feels like a tech demo for Rebirth at this point because the complexity on top of the
complexity. It was like a proof of concept.
Yeah, they're like, look, we could do something like this. And everyone said, yeah. And they're like, okay, we actually meant something this size instead. And it is very funny because, like you said, I'm going to count Yuffie, even though she was in the DLC, because that was just her.
Yeah.
But it's like, there are 3 entirely new characters added on top of all the characters from the previous game that now you can switch out. There are times when, again, they lock your party, but for the most of the game, you have complete access to whichever characters you have unlocked at that point. And so it got to the point where I started like looking around and going, oh, that looks like a cool synergy move. I just never have Kate Sith and Tifa on my team at the same time because I usually have him with Red 13 or, Tifa's with me and Barrett or me and Aerith. And it's just, you had to sit there and would be constantly like tweaking things because you're like, actually, I would be sitting there so much. I did have by the end kind of like my preferred team, but for much of the game, I was constantly tinkering with like, okay, what do these characters do together? Or like, how do they complement each other? Or actually this battle might be easier if I have specifically like Red 13 and Yuffie or whatnot. So
that was like my go-to party was Cloud, Red 13 and Yuffie.
Yuffie's actually, because I don't know if they realize this, because she was in the DLC, the only character you played as, she's kind of broken.
Yeah.
I love her so much. But
once I unlocked that like Windstorm ability she has.
The Windstorm, the Doppelganger, and then the Elemental Ninjutsu combined, you do a bunch of damage. You then double your attacks with the Doppelganger thing. So every single move of any sort, this includes limit breaks and spells and everything, gets doubled because your Doppelganger also does them. And then you have the Elemental Ninjutsu, so it means no matter what material you have equipped, whatever that guy's weakness is, you can just make that your basic attack now and just murder them.
Yeah, she was pretty annoying, honestly. I felt like she got kind of her character. That was one thing about the game, and we'll get into it more about in spoilers, was just it felt like a lot of the characters after their chapter where they got to shine were just kind of limited to whatever their, like for her, everything was materia. I just have to chase materia. And it's like, okay, we get it. We understand.
No, there is a point where, like you said, there's some stuff. They do some nice stuff in there, here and there. But there is absolutely a point where I was a little bit wishing it's like, I kind of would like more, like, because the game is so built around hanging out with these characters, you're sitting there going, I kind of wish Red 13 would talk a little bit more and like give some more like insight onto this, or Barrett would meet Cloud and Barrett could have another moment, or like, et cetera,
it felt like, and it felt like Yuffie, like in the back half of the game, it felt like Yuffie and Kate Sith got a lot of the spotlight, and it was like the main characters, especially the ones from Remake, just kind of took a sideline until chapter 13 and 14.
There was a bit where, and we've talked about this, that Aerith is one of my favorite characters in a video game. There was a bit where like she got some stuff to do in Costa del Sol, and then she got the stuff at the Golden Saucer. But otherwise, the large chunk of this game is a little bit light on Aerith. And knowing where we were going with the end of this game, I'm like, that's a weird decision. And then they pull way back into the Aerith focus for the last chunk. And I was like, okay, cool. Because I was like, the chunks of Aerith I was getting were like orchestrated by me, because I picked Aerith as the date for the Golden Saucer. And I'm like, otherwise, there are large chunks of that game that like, Aerith's not in this as much as I kind of thought she would be.
Yeah.
I mean, she can always be part of your party. And I had her in there because once I figured out how to use her, she's pretty good as a support. But yeah, it's a different when they're just giving their little chirps and talking about, oh no, we got to fight this guy, versus actual meaty story moments. And same with Tifa. Tifa has her like big moment about halfway through the game. And then there's not a lot of Tifa unless you pick her as your Golden Saucer.
Yeah, which I did. And we'll definitely talk about chapter 12 when we get into spoilers. I think in the non-spoiler section, like a few things to maybe touch on is like, I thought the game still looked incredible. I think because it was so much larger, it felt like there was definitely something different visually from this game compared to Remake. I didn't think it was worse, but it was just like, as when I booted it up, having just played Remake so recently for the last one, I was like, it's not quite 1-to-1, but I think it still looked really good. Obviously, this game is still visually super impressive.
Yes. My specific nit to pick is they were really, really proud of their physics engine. Like, absurdly proud of their physics engine. Like, look at all the random crap we can have scattered on the ground, and like, it flies around in battle, or you can kick or whatnot. And there was a point, not even like 10 hours in the game, I'm like, okay, guys, I get it. Like, just chill out a little bit. Because I'd be walking down a hallway and you just like knock this boulder like 30 feet by like hitting it with your sword the wrong way. And I'm just sort of like, this is actually kind of distracting. Like, it's kind of like, yes, there's physics. I see them. You've made your point.
Yeah. There were also just some weird design decisions, I felt like, with like exploring the open world, doing side stuff. One thing that I felt like was that there was always one step too many to get anything accomplished. I always felt like there was one extra step of tedium to unlock the fast travel, to unlock whatever, to finish a quest. Like, there was just always one step too many that made things feel tedious. And then there were just little things like, it's not a button prompt to mount your chocobo. You just walk into it.
Yes.
So there would be times I'd get stuck in a loop, hop off my chocobo to like raise the little sign at the chocobo stop. But before I could actually get to it, I'd accidentally remount my chocobo, then get off it, then accidentally remount. So I'd have to like get on it, walk it like 10 feet away, then get off, then come back to my objective, because it was just like magnetizing my character back on top of it.
There's a couple of things about the chocobo. And first of all, before we go into spoilers, I want to talk about like the open world and the chocobos quite a bit, because like there's a lot there. But about the chocobo stop specifically,
such a Caleb thing to say,
because I realize we're heading there and I'm like, we've barely touched on the fact that this game is gigantic in terms of like,
there's just so much weird nonsense to talk about in the story stuff that like, I feel like the spoiler section is going to be long.
Yes, that's why I'm like, I'll try to get through it quickly, but now I'm like, ooh, shoot, we do have to cover this a little bit, because people are going to be like, wait, hang on, no one warned me about this. The chocobo stuff, they are magnetic. Specifically, I tested this a couple of times because I started noticing it. If you go near an object that like in the Junon where they climb up the cliffs, or in Gongaga where they bounce off the mushrooms, if you approach that, even if you haven't summoned your chocobo, they will always materialize to you and like kind of like start heading towards you to pick you up, because they know like they're trying to use the mushroom. They can't do that without a chocobo. However, they have unlocked the chocobo for this area, so he's just going to sneak up behind him so they don't even have to think about it. They can just turn and he's there.
When you unlock a buggy at a certain point.
Yeah.
And I got, like, the buggy was so nice when you're in it and driving around, but
it takes
a full animation to get in the thing and get out of the thing, and there would be times where it's like, oh, here's a wall. Got to get out. Got to use your grappling hook to get up the wall. Then you got to resummon the buggy. Then you got to get back in the buggy, and it was just steps like that kept the buggy, adding up.
The buggy I loved, but that did annoy me. I was also going to say, you can pick up the chocobo sign stops while riding on the chocobo. Like the chocobo will pick it up. It's actually faster. Like it takes like a full animation. The chocobo just like grabs it with its leg and flips it up, and it takes like 2 seconds.
I never knew that.
I didn't at first because I was doing the same thing, and Alex watching me play is like, you can actually do it faster if you ride the chocobo. I'm like, let me see. And I did it. And it's like, because the cloud putting it up takes like a good solid like 5-6 second animation. The chocobo just like picks it up and it's there. And
that's another thing about this game is like dude with a massive sword jumping around, swinging like crazy. Takes him like 5 seconds to lift a sign and twist it because it's so heavy apparently. Yeah. There's a lot in this game that like you really have to remind yourself that it's supposed to be silly.
Yes. This is the goofy episode of Final Fantasy VII. Like, there's going to be a whole bunch of dark, depressing stuff in the next one. There's a whole bunch of dark, depressing stuff in the first one. There's dark, depressing stuff in this one. The Barrett storyline's very good. But, yeah, this one's the goofy beach episode, for example. Also, open world, I'll cover that in the side quest row. Because the main thing about side quests, and I have to state this, most of the side quests are focused, like we've talked about, on the different characters. However, most of the other side content that is not directly a quest, I love Chadley. Chadley's great. There's so much Chadley in this game. And I knew there was going to be some Chadley. I knew they're like, oh yeah, Chadley has a bunch of stuff for you to do. I knew he's going to have the VR missions. I cannot stress this enough to anyone who hasn't played it yet. Chadley is like 70% of the side content. Like you have your main story and you have the sideboard missions like that you get posted on the things, and those are the character-centric stuff. Every other bit of side content in this game is at least in some way connected to some crap Chadley's having you do.
Yeah, they even gave him Girl Chadley.
Yes, which was really funny, both because like we already have Chadley. I don't know why we need Girl Chadley too. And also, he kept being, just as a fun character moment for me, he kept being really annoyed at how she interrupted and being like, dude, she's an AI you made. I don't know why you're mad at her. Just tweak the settings or something. I don't know, man. How
long did it take you to turn it off your controller speaker?
Oh, I love the controller speaker.
Oh, you kept that the whole time?
Yeah, I kept that the whole time. I like the stuff like that. I'm playing 16 right now, and I like whenever you pet Torgal and you can hear Torgal panting at the speaker on the TV and the controller.
Yeah, I don't remember 16 having as much controller.
No, like, they really liked it in this.
7 Remake, or Rebirth, yeah, it was like anytime Cloud opened up his little like iPad device thing, it was coming out of the controller. And I kept it like that at first because I was like, this is a pretty cool little gimmick thing. And then there was one night where like Abby was asleep on the couch next to me, and then like Chadley starts yelling out of my controller about something, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna switch this back to the TV speakers.
Oh, that's entirely fair. Because I really liked it, but they do every time you talk to anyone. The from an aesthetics point of view, I think part of the weirdness with Rebirth in terms of visuals is stuff like it is, again, a remake of a 30-year-old game, of a game that released in 1997. A lot of the aesthetic decisions are very things that happened, like were big in 1997, or where the state of technology was in 1997, or even what the state of like what they imagined past technology was in 1997. And then a bunch of the new stuff all has just like, it is 2024. And so like they have stuff that looks like 90s computer technology, but then also Cloud has this little thing that looks like a
it's like a gun handle.
Gun handle that has a holographic projector on it that does like anything he needs it to. And it's just sort of like, this is, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm like, this is an interesting like clash of sensibilities. Choice, yeah.
You're playing through 16 now. How did you feel about the icons in that game versus the like summons in this game? They feel like so much more almost like kid versions in Rebirth.
Well, no,
to me.
I actually really like it's very funny because I love the summons in Rebirth, but it is funny because like 16, the entire plot is about the summons. Rebirth, they're all side stuff. None of them are essential. You start with a couple, and then you can earn more.
Yeah, they only come up as like a combat thing.
Well, 16, they're part of the story. But it is really funny, as like 7 uses the classic designs for all of them. So like the stuff they've 16 heavily redesigns everyone, and they are like full on like, this is the design for Ifrit, and 16 rules. I love it so much. And meanwhile, in 7 Rebirth, I'm like, oh, right, he was originally like an evil genie guy. That was their design for him in like Final Fantasy II, and that's what it's been ever since. I'm like, oh, yeah, no, that's okay.
Yeah, what's the like giant rock guy?
Oh, Titan.
Titan looks so like goofy in Rebirth after playing 16.
And it's also very funny because he's handy, don't get me wrong.
No, I love him. I have him equipped all the time.
But it is very funny because like all of them, they're kind of cheating because of how the summons work. We talked about this last time, and Remake summons were battle specific. Only certain battles could you use your summons. Here, it's literally any battle. As soon as you've staggered an enemy, you can summon. Like it'll start building.
Yeah, there'd be some battles like just out in the open world fighting grunts where I'm like,
oh hey, you could.
Like the summon meter's filling. I'm like, it would take more time to watch the animation than I need for this fight. Like,
no,
chill out.
It happened all the time at a certain point. They're like, there'd be times I actually, for a couple of the Chadley's assignments, the combat assignments, I was too over leveled for some of those because one of them would be like, stagger this enemy. And I'm like, even when I'm trying to use like Tifa, who you can really cheese into like being super stagger person,
you're just killing them.
I just would kill them before their stagger meter would ever fill up. And so I had to like go into my settings and be like, change enemy difficulty to like very hard. So they're bullet sponges basically. And I can spend more time wailing on them and building up their stagger so I can get the last little check mark I need on this stupid assignment. But no, Titan cracks me up specifically because I just played the big Titan fight in Final Fantasy 16 last week. And like because the summons in this game have to be available in literally any battle, that does mean they all can only be so big.
Yeah.
So like he's huge, but he's also kind of stocky and stumpy. Like they kind of cheat. It's like the Disney World thing where the castle seems huge, and it's like that's because the top is smaller than it should be. So it casts this optical illusion of being top is smaller than it actually would be. So it has this optical illusion of like it looks like it's getting really high up there, but it's just they're doing the same thing with him. Like he looks big and imposing, but if you like look at him for longer than a couple seconds, you're like, oh, his legs are kind of short, actually. Like they just really made him beefy and stocky, and then kind of cheated and gave him like kind of like legs that are 3/4 of the length they probably should be. So he never doesn't fit in the environment. Yeah. Meanwhile, you play the Titan fight in 16 and he's the size of a desert. Like he's gargantuan. It's like, yeah, that's a different take on all of that.
Yeah.
How'd you feel about because they had the summons from the past game are either you start out with Ifrit and Shiva and I think the Chocobo and Moogle?
Yes.
And then if you have save file from 7, you get Leviathan and Rama.
Really?
Yes, like it carries over. You get those. They're pretty handy. Like they're not super OP.
If you have a save file from Remake?
Yeah. It did a thing at the beginning where it's like, hey, you have a save file. Do you want to transfer that information? And it's like you get a couple bonus things, including that. But then you had the 3 new summons. How'd you feel about them just in general?
I really liked Alexander.
Alexander's handy. 4 new summons. No, it's more than... How many are there? I'm doing the math. I think it's 4 or 5. It's also funny because there's 3 versions of Bama in the original Final Fantasy VII. And I can tell that the bit for this trilogy is you get the original Bama in 1, you get the next level Bama in Rebirth, and they'll have the final form of Bama as...
Yeah, I know I got Phoenix, and I know I got Alexander. I feel like I got one more. Because I did all the side stuff in like the first 3 zones.
Okay.
And then I just kind of started mainlining things. I would do the character quests. And the fast travel requirement quests.
Yeah.
And then I just started trying to beeline it to the end. I was like, I need to finish this.
Like, I need to wrap this up, actually.
Yeah. No. So I have a lot of side stuff I could go back and do, including some of the, like, because you have to go around and find the, like, little caves that have the
The summon crystal data.
So. Yeah, it's like a little circle like memory puzzle kind of mini game thing that you do to get it. You do that 3 times, it makes the fight easier. So I did that for at least 3.
I want to say there's 5. I want to say there's 5 altogether. However, I'm sitting here thinking like I'm pretty sure there's a 6th, and I'm just not remembering what it is. But
yeah, I liked the variety, and I liked how like Alexander, because my experience with Final Fantasy is pretty much like 16 and 15 and 7. So like I had never really seen Alexander before.
Yeah.
And was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like it's a different kind of thing that I hadn't really experienced. So that was fun.
Now, the thing I kind of liked about the whole game, and this kind of encompasses the open world, the enemies, all that sort of stuff, is that they seem to have put a lot of work into making it feel like an actual place with like a cohesive thing. Like all the summons are like kind of built into the lore of the world. All the enemies look like they've been put a lot of, because it's very funny if you go look at all the enemies from Final Fantasy VII, the original, they're very clearly just some weird gremlins some designers made and said, here's a guy you can fight. He's an eyeball with a mouth, and then he's got 2 spindly legs. And someone went and said, okay, but like what habitat? Let me write up. If you read the little data sheets on them when you assess them, they put so much work into like, this is how this thing functions. This is where it lives. It's regional to these areas. That's whatever. So it was neat to see kind of the history, the culture, and you could pick up little bits and pieces of everything. I think that's a really neat aspect to it. Even if it does mean sometimes they were cowards and didn't keep, because one of the more fun things about Final Fantasy VII, the original, and you can tell it in this still, they would just do weird things. Like there was not really coherent in the enemy design. There was one that kind of have it here, but they cheat. Like I said, they're cowards. There's one guy, there's just like a living motorcycle. Like it's just like an evil motorcycle with like arms and like a head or whatnot. And it's just like, yeah, we have one of those in a couple optional fights, but it's just a dude riding on a weird motorcycle. Like he does the same thing. It's clearly the same guy. A lot of the aesthetics are carried over, but I'm like, no, he was literally in the old game a living motorcycle. I'm very curious because we're going to get to a section. They had a bad guy, a tougher, higher level bad guy who was like a Triceratops tank. Like it had a tank body and it had a Triceratops top half. And I'm just sitting here going, do they try to make it work? Or are they going to be cowards and be like, well, it's like a Triceratops looking thing, and it's, but like it's not super mechanized or whatnot. Because there was no explanation. It wasn't just like a Hojo's lab experiment thing, just out in the world somewhere. I do appreciate the attempt at coherency, but I do kind of miss just the fact that sometimes the random battle screen pop up and be like, what is that? Where did that come from?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how because even outside of ridiculous stuff like that, I always kind of would remind myself, or would get the feeling of like, oh yes, this is a super high fidelity modern interpretation of a really old game, and that's why sometimes these things seem ridiculous, or like, why am I doing this, or just the setting we're in. And it's like, you just kind of have to keep in mind they're just adapting this thing that, back when video games were still first being created and they were just throwing stuff at the wall.
Oh no, this is very much like I think the bottom line, the non-spoilerly bottom line for me is like, you will love this game if you explicitly love, as I do, the fusion of 90s game design sensibilities with modern game design sensibilities only when necessary. Like they tweak a handful of things, the combat system's all new, they'll make some stuff just easier on you, like some quality of life improvements. But at its core, it's like, no, there were several chunks of it I was reminded of stuff like Banjo-Kazooie or like old PS2 games. Like it was absolutely something where it's like, oh yeah, no one really thinks like this anymore in terms of like, one of the things I always loved about 90s Squaresoft games in particular is it's like they made it their mission to me, like, this is the most video game to ever video game. We have every genre of video game inside of our one video game. And that's like, okay. And this one kind of goes back to that, where there's like chunks of it, the Chocobo races, where it's just like, you just Mario Kart. It's like you only have to do one story mandated one, but it's like if you want to, there's like an entire, and I did all of them. There's an entire just like Mario Kart sub game inside this game, and they do that like 18 different times.
Yeah, because I don't know if we really explicitly said it, but like the game is broken up into do a big story thing that's a lot of like combat, maybe a little bit of like
a dungeon, like a proper dungeon.
Yeah,
usually.
like level exploration kind of stuff, and then get into an open area, and all of the side stuff pretty much is going to lead to some sort of mini game. If it's not combat, it's some sort of mini game, and everything is there's a lot of repeated mini games, like how you acquire chocobo and things like that. But then
although they didn't repeat that one as off, I kind of like you do it the first couple times, the chocobo acquiring game, and I'm like, this is just going to be the pattern for every level, and then they don't do it for a long while, and then they bring it back, and I was like, oh
yeah. And then there's like a lot of just different weird random stuff that happens. There's just like pianos around the world you can play as like a mini game. Like the world is full of mini games, and some of them are fun. Some of them is like you can play Rocket League as Red 13.
Yeah.
And then some of them are like, I could take or leave this. And so I think like that is a big part of how like mileage may vary playing this game.
I do absolutely, because I loved 90% of them, but you'd have stuff where like we talked last time, I'm like, man, I loved Fort Condor. I hope they bring Fort Condor back. And they do, kind of, as one of these little side quest minigame things. And I was like, I kind of regret wishing this came back. This one's a little bit of a pain, actually.
Yeah. And then there was a minigame that you play.
Was it Gears and Gambits?
No, during the beach section is Barrett, where you like, it's like a shooting gallery.
Oh, yeah.
And just I don't know if it was the controls or what, but like I had to do that one 3 or 4 times to finally get a high enough score.
That was one of the last things I did, because if you get the highest high score, you get a special little plaque for your trophy wall.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I'll go. And I was trying to pick what I was going to do before I wanted to downplay it. I was like, oh, I can go do that real quick, because I was pretty good at it. But like, I just seriously tweaked the controls and like fiddle with it for a good minute, because I could not crack the score I needed. And it was frustrating because it was not by much. Like, it was not like I was like, oh, wow, this is way too hard. I'm like, no, I'm only off by like 3 or 4 targets. What am I doing wrong? So yes, there's a lot of game inside this game, to the point where
you hit a point where you can just go like on a treasure hunt on the open sea, like searching for pirate treasure.
I loved that. Like I think that's when I turned to Alex, said I do think this is one of my favorite games of all time, because I'm already having a great time. And like,
when they just incorporate Wind Waker into
they
it.
do. They're just like, hey, you want to go sail and hunt for pirate treasure? Which is really funny. Mild spoiler, I guess. The payoff for that is whatever. Like, it's okay. But I had a great time doing it. But it is so funny, because like it's right near the end of the game, and you're like, okay, I've only got a couple things more to do before I head to the last section of the game, like the point of no return. And it's like, real quick, there is buried pirate treasure that you can go find if you want to. And I'm like, this game's got everything.
Yes, it has everything in my experience, to varying levels of like fun. But if you if you really like enjoy that, there's just a ton for you in this game. I think the last thing that we really have to touch on before moving into spoilers is Queen's Blood.
Holy crap. I did not want to like Queen's Blood. I played the first couple, like, because you only have to play Queen's Blood, like, I think twice in the entire game. And even then, I don't think it's super mandatory. It's just like, hey, here's Queen's Blood.
You have to play it. Well, you can kind of just like fail out of the tournament, which is what I had to do, because I hadn't been playing it up to that point very much. And then I got to the tournament, was like, I cannot win.
There's like a couple bits where they kind of like that.
And then there was like a quest in like the desert or whatever, where you had to go play some people to progress, like to get the vegetable.
It was one of the vegetable options. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you have 6 vegetable options. You only have to do 3 of them. But if you do all 6 of them, you get a bonus outfit for your chocobo. So I did.
Yep.
But yes, no, I didn't think I was going to like Queen's Blood, but I did the couple tutorial missions. And at first I was like, yeah, I'm not really feeling it, but whatever. But then I did a couple more missions, and I started like, I compulsively, because you get to a point where if you do enough of the side stuff, you just start making too much money. Like, it gets easy to have overloaded with like, I've got a bunch of gil, and like, they're pretty sparse on like the major gear drops that you have to spend money on. Like, they come up every other chapter or so for like, oh, here's a new weapon for someone.
Yeah, and a lot of the like books that help you or whatever are hidden behind the Moogle thing.
So like, you get to a point pretty early in the game where you start very easily having more money than you need, especially with the crafting system. The only thing you'd really spend money on is like consumables, like potions and stuff like that. But it got really, really easy for me to like not even paying attention, but just because I have that video game brain thing I've been playing for almost 30 years. Anytime there's a shiny thing, I go pick it up in any condition. So it's like you have 99 of this little random material. So like I never really ran out of potions because it was really easy to make potions of various sorts. So I never needed the money. So I just started buying every time I saw a Queen's Blood deck anywhere. I just buy it because I had the money. And
I did that
not?
because The Witcher 3 taught me to do that with Gwent cards. So like I was like, every time the shop would have
a new deck or a new card.
deck or card, I was like, I'll go, because they were always cheap too. It was like 500 gils. So it was like,
no, and I was the same thing. Then I started like playing it some more because like some of the side quests you don't have to, but like they push you to, and there's a couple little challenges, and I actually had a great time with the tournament thing. And then after a bit, I was like, I really like Queen's Blood. Actually, I would if they made this as like an actual card game, I would get it. Like,
yeah, because it's essentially it's a chess style board, but you use cards to kind of place your pieces. So it's like a
combination of like
hybrid.
It's like almost a combination of like a card game with like a deck, but also like a Fire Emblem thing where you're trying to gain territory. It took me forever because the first few times, again, this helped that Alex had played the game before me and gave me some pointers. He looked at me, I was struggling on one of the things, and I was like kind of doing okay. He's like, you're playing this game wrong. And I said, what? I'm trying to get the most points. He said, you do need the most points. You're just trying it purely on numbers. You don't actually need to have the most points. You just need to have more points than them. So if you can make them have fewer points by having fewer territory, that gets like the same thing. And I went, oh, he's like, because he said, watch, you're putting this guy here. And I'm like, yeah, because his bonus gets that here. He's like, take that card, put it here, and now you take that space from him. He can't use it. And I'm like, right, I know, but look, I don't have a lot of points like on that thing now. And he said, it doesn't matter because he's not going to ever be able to use that spot. You can now put stuff on these spots and he can't do anything about it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. Okay.
Yeah, I ended up finding a deck. I think it was after the tournament. I like looked up just some like Queen's Blood tips strategies and stuff. And I ended up making a deck that was all about just like fast control of the board.
Yep.
And I pretty much used that through the whole game. And yeah, that there was one game that really sticks out in my mind where I lost 2 out of 3 lanes.
But you win the one lane.
My third lane had like 20 something points in it. And so I just won the game.
It's always so satisfying.
So yeah, there is a really deep level of strategy. I do think that where the tournament is in the game could have like,
it's a little early. If
it's
you've not
early,
been doing it.
Yeah, I'd played maybe 2 rounds or 3 rounds. I was like, I may, at that point, my thought process was I could get into this maybe, but right now I want to just kind of get the game going. And then I hit a tournament and I'm like, well, I have nothing. I have like the beginner cards.
Right. I do recommend once you have chapter select, going back and playing, because there's a lot of fun character stuff. There's some great comedy bits. I might go play it again because part of the tournament is it's in like 5 rounds and your last opponent is always going to be the same, but like how you get there I think one of the first rounds you have your entire party to choose from and some extra randos.
Yeah.
But like everyone starts whittling down as the tournament goes along. So like I played against Barrett for my thing with my party, but it's like, okay, I want to go play a match against Tifa, a match against Aerith, a match against, Yuffie's not with you at that point. I want to go see this, or you can pick like the 2 people from Walmart who are on the boat. I only did one of them. Like I only fought one of them. So it's like, yeah, it was. I'd like to go play it again, just see how the other interactions.
Just the different interactions. Yeah.
And then the payoff for the tournament, your actual final opponent it's a hysterical sequence. I don't know if anyone's told you anything about it yet, but it's very funny.
No, I haven't seen anything about it. Now that I have a deck, I may go back and load it up because chapter select is a big deal.
Yes,
to be able to just kind of go pick and choose.
I actually I mentioned I've done a bunch of the post game stuff. When I got to the post game stuff, I actually had to I picked the wrong chapter at first because there's a point in the game where certain things are sealed away from you. Like certain characters are not available, but there's a very small window where you have access to everything and all of your characters and gear before that stuff starts getting sealed away. And so I picked the wrong chapter at first and I was like, hang on, I can't go everywhere I need to go. And then I picked the other wrong chapter. I was like, okay, now I can go everywhere I need to go. However, I don't have all the characters I need to have. So I need to go back to this one spot in the story where I have all of the characters and all of the access.
Is there anything else that we need to say before we dive into spoilers? And I mean, it's going to just be a lot of story stuff, but there's also probably some game things that we'll talk about in there. But anything else we need to get out of the way in the spoiler-free section?
I will say they did. If you, for some reason, love Final Fantasy VII and have not played this game, I can assure you they do right by basically all of the various little characters. Like we meet a bajillion more. We met a bajillion people last time. There's a bajillion more. All of them are great. Like Elena is here now, and she's fantastic. I love her. We'll talk a little bit about it, I'm sure, but the stuff with Barrett and his past is all really great. Yeah, they do good. I like how they handle Red 13 and Kate Sith as characters so much better in this than I did in the original.
Interesting, because those two are the ones that we'll probably talk about in the
we are absolutely going to have to talk about, because there's actually a couple big things with Kate Sith that they, like, I enjoyed playing as him in the original, but I'm like, this is a weird character that I do not think works all the way. He was the only one of the party that I'm like, I have, like, everyone else. I love Vincent Valentine. I love Yuffie. I love all these characters. Kate Sith was the one. I love Sid. Kate Sith was the one I was like, I don't really care for this guy. And in this one, I'm like, oh, this is so much better. This is so much better as a character, actually.
Wow. He must have started at complete zero, because I did not care for him in this game.
I loved him. Like, they I think the big thing is, I'm just amused by Scottish Robot Cat, but also there's a couple of big story stuff. Was, like you said, we're talking later in the game, very different vibes in the original, and it's like the tweaks they made. I'm like, that makes more sense. Like that's a better fit for everything, actually.
Interesting. Well, if you've played the game and you want to hear our thoughts on what we're about to get into, stick around until after the music break here. If you have not played the game yet, come back later and listen to this section, and feel free to skip ahead to our verdicts. But yes, we're about to head into full spoilers, so after this music, we will be in full spoiler talk for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
You should use the Gungaga music for the edit. It's so good.
All right, we are back. Full spoilers now, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and it has to be talked about, so we might as well start here. The ending of this game.
I think the funniest response to the ending of this game, because we talked about like where it was going to end, what was going to happen, what we thought was going to happen, etc. last time. The funniest response I saw to the ending of this game is a post I saw where someone said, I guess I didn't realize that like my PlayStation account was connected to my email, and that they do stuff for trophies sometimes, because they said I beat Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and I checked my email the next day and I saw I got an email from PlayStation thanking me for playing the game, beating the game, and it said, now you know what Aerith's fate is. And they looked at the email for a second and said, do I though? Actually, I think it's the funniest possible solution. This is the thing where I am the most interested, because it's the funniest possible solution. We're like, okay, are they going to kill her or not? And the answer they said was both, maybe?
Yeah.
Huh? So, yeah, if you, for some reason, haven't played the game and are still listening to this, their solution is towards the end of the game, they get really into some more like, yeah, there's parallel worlds happening here.
Yeah, we didn't talk about it in the spoiler-free section, but you play as Zack throughout the whole game and kind of like...
Yes, although it is also
dimension.
Funny, because speaking of plot that disappears for like the middle 50 hours, there's a long period of time without Zack.
Yeah, you play as Zack a lot early on and Sephiroth a lot early on, and Sephiroth is like super involved in the like beginning chapters of the game.
Right.
And then depending on how much side stuff you do and what you're doing throughout the game, it's like you get back to the end. Oh yeah, he's back.
Yeah. But yeah, you do have, if anyone has played, and I'm only thinking of it because Alex is playing it right now, is Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, where it would have the chapters, and this game is also broken down into chapters. And at the end of each story chapter, Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, it would have a little mini chapter of what Princess Peach was up to, and you play as Princess Peach and go through her little stuff, and then a mini chapter of what Bowser was up to, and you have a little mini chapter where you play as Bowser, and it was usually hysterical. This is the same thing, except it's not every chapter. It's usually about every 2 or 3. You would have a chunk where they then would go in and check in on Zack and see what he was doing. And for the longest time, I have to say, it was very funny because every time I got to a Zack section, I'd be like, I don't know if this, because people have posited like parallel worlds. Is that how it works? And I'm like, I don't know if it is or if Zack is simply a lot. If this stuff is happening literally, because they're also very strict, like you cannot go back to Midgar. And it's, I think, very intentionally made very unclear for about the first 3/4 of the game. You don't know if Zack is in another world or if, like, if you walked into Midgar as your party right now, Zack would just be there and be like, 2 clouds? What's going on? But yeah, so they do the whole parallel world stuff. And then at the end, when it's the big moment, they absolutely build up to the big moment where Aerith's about to get killed. And Cloud both does and doesn't stop Sephiroth. There is a weird thing where you see him stop Sephiroth from killing her. And then she, like, the entire reality kind of glitches and she dies anyway. But then you see both versions kind of back and forth.
Well, it's like this whole time Sephiroth has been toying with Cloud and is kind of like in his head. Now also Aerith is doing the same thing.
Right. There is absolutely, because I've seen a whole bunch of interpretations of it. And the most common interpretation I see of it is that, and I think on some thematic level, this is very true, where it's just like Cloud didn't save her. He's in denial. Like, he's in strict denial. It's like, Aerith's still alive. What are you talking about? Like, he's not accepting her death. Like, it's a grief thing. And given that the game also very funnily does not get into, because this was the big problem of dividing it into 3, is like all the payoff for all of Cloud's headaches and all of Cloud's like weird personality stuff, not going to be till like the first.
Yeah, that was really irritating because Cloud is just like
not okay for most of the game.
Yeah, through like the back half of this game, and then it's like not talked about or resolved.
It
at
actually
all.
Is very funny because I knew one way or another. I'm like, yeah, I kind of know where this is going to end. Where it ends, I'm like, well, this is actually darker than the original game at this point. Like, because now the implication is that like Aerith might be dead, and also Cloud was not doing well in the original. He's cooked in this one. Cloud, even if Aerith is, we'll try to pull it apart. Even if Aerith is kind of alive, Cloud's regardless just not okay. He is, lights are on, no one's home sort of thing.
Based on like the few videos I watched and kind of the little fragments I was trying to put together myself, I kind of took the ending as an Aerith has died.
That's how I took it, is the Aerith we've been hanging out with is dead. However, Aerith herself, a version of her,
in the same way that Sephiroth is trying to manipulate and control the multiverses to like his aims, Aerith is trying to stop him in the
from
multiverses.
doing that. Yes, I agree.
And Cloud can see them both.
Yes, that's kind of where I come down on it. What does that mean when we get to the end of part 3? And it's like, is Aerith alive, or is she just like one with the life stream, or what? I don't know.
Yeah, see, I have no idea because I haven't played the original. So like for me, it's all kind of new.
Yeah.
I don't have the context of like, well, if they're doing this in this version, how does that going to line up with the old version?
Oh yeah, no, but I think there's a whole lot of different bits why I'm like, I think there's still the possibility we get to the end of part 3 and Aerith and Zack are like, hey, we're okay actually. But I don't know, because it is very intentionally.
Yeah, like, are they going to combine all universes at some point?
Yeah, who knows? But that's the kind of thing we're ending this game on, where I was like, they're going to pick one or the other. And they said, no, screw you, come back in 4 years. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, which I thought that they were going to do either something like this, because they've been hinting at like multiverse stuff.
Yeah.
Like the end of Remake, which was heavily referenced again to remind you of it in this game, touched on those kind of themes. But then also just the whole subversion thing. I thought that they were either going to not kill Aerith at all, just to completely flip the script,
right?
Or they're going to do some crazy nonsense like this.
Yes, and let's be clear. I Alex and me, before the game came out, argued, because I was pretty confident, like, no, I think they're going to keep Aerith alive because, like, they're going to not kill her. Because to me, once you put the card on the table that, like, hey, we're changing things, that's the number one question anyone is going to ask is, like, well, the one aspect of this game is that everyone was like, if you could change, like, Aerith being alive, that's what they would do. And it's just like, that'd be interesting. But as Alex kept pointing out to me, he's like, you're not wrong, Caleb. However, the back half of the game is about Aerith's death. It is about grief and trauma, and it is about, like, the plot doesn't actually make a lot of sense if Aerith is alive, because, like, as you'll find out in the next game, her dying kicked into effect. Let me put it this way. If Aerith in the original game didn't die when she did, the next chunk of the game, instead of being the back 20 hours of the game, would be like 6. She's just like, they're like, what do we do with this? And she's like, this. And then we're done. Problem solved. Everyone go home. Except entirely possible that Cloud would still be wigging out. Yeah. To me, the most frustrating bit, though, about that, like, they didn't even pay that off thing, is the following the hooded guys for the reunion thing. There is a specific payoff to that, and I understand why they waited. Like, I understand why they wanted to end here, but it's like, there is a very specific bit that will both bring stuff with Cloud into a little bit more of a focus and pay off following the hooded robes. It's going to be like 4 hours into the next game. Like, it's just far enough away in the plot where I understand why they didn't want to have this moment and then kind of have you limp for another 4 hours.
Right.
To this, to be fair, kind of cliffhangery, but not nearly as big a thing, whatnot. But it would kind of close off the entire Black Robe, like, arc they're doing for most of the game. And it's like, yeah, but it is close enough. It's really frustrating because you're like, like you said in the non-spoiler section, the plot of the game is those Black Robe guys are doing something. We should try to figure that out. And it's like, we get an answer to that. Just not yet.
Yeah, there's definitely some of the growing pains of dividing this into a trilogy.
Because the best way, I think, to look at the game as a whole is it's kind of like it's got the structure of like an old detective noir thing where you're like trying to piece together the puzzles. So what that means in the game structure is you get all of the answers at the end, and that's fine in a Sherlock Holmes story or whatnot. But when it's a trilogy, that means this one specifically, you are kicking around with like no clue what any of it means until probably about halfway through the next game. It's like, this is specifically Sephiroth's deal. This is specifically Cloud's deal. This is what Aerith was trying to do and why we need to do this to make sure it still happens even though she's gone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is what Hojo did. This is, blah, 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 blah. It's like, oh, that makes, when you're playing one 60-hour game back in 1997, it's like having all the payoffs be in the last 20 hours. That makes sense. When it's now 3 games that the total play time is probably going to end up somewhere being around like 300 hours. It's like, well, now that's actually like a little frustrating that it's going to be in the last 50, and that one's not going to be out for 4 years.
Do they ever, like, Sephiroth seems so ungrounded?
Yes, this is actually an element, because I guess we should warn people. We did last time, and you said it in the intro, but like, this game is intentionally playing with stuff across the entire Final Fantasy VII shared universe, Crisis Core, Advent Children, all of that.
Right, so we're in full spoilers for everything.
So if you've not played anything, maybe be prepared to learn some stuff right now, or maybe go quickly play Crisis Core and maybe watch Advent Children. To be fair, Crisis Core is only like 30 hours. As a Final Fantasy game, it's pretty short.
Only 30 hours.
The funniest thing about Sephiroth in the original game, he's wrong. He doesn't actually know what's happening. The whole Sephiroth's plot in the original game is he is a genetic super soldier who finds out that everything he was told about his childhood is a lie, makes a certain assumption, and goes insane off of that, and like is also almost immediately after he goes insane and murders everyone in Cloud's Village, because they didn't cover this in the Rebirth because we're going to get the answers next time, but it's in Crisis Core. Sephiroth dies shortly after that scene. Sephiroth is technically dead. Cloud kills him, but he gets absorbed in the live stream. Genova has taken over most of what cellular thing he had left and is piecing him back together. So Sephiroth has no clue what's going on. He thinks he's what Aerith is, one of the Cetra, And he's like, this planet belongs to me. No, he's a super soldier created from Genova cells. So he's part alien. He doesn't know what's going on. He's wrong about most of it. And by the end, he's mostly like run by the spite he has towards Cloud for killing him that one time. And Genova brain cells that have been misinformed. Like, Sephiroth doesn't know what's going on. He's just going psychotic. But he's so incredibly powerful that it could actually end the world. I am very curious to see, because this Sephiroth is very clearly different than the original Sephiroth because he knows about all this multiverse stuff. Part of me really hopes that he is still in the same boat where he thinks he understands the multiverse stuff and is still kind of wrong.
I guess my thing is, like, Sephiroth seems godlike.
He is. That's the thing. He is at this point.
He can just, like, appear whenever he wants to, wherever he wants to. He can fly around. He can turn into, like, the crazy monster at the end.
This is the thing. This is the thing. In the original Final Fantasy VII, you do not meet the real Sephiroth, or what's left of him, until the part where I said where the black robes come up.
Mm.
That's the first time, is when they find his frozen body in ice up north that they're heading. Like, that's not the whole story with the black robes. There is actually, they get into that a little bit, but that's Sephiroth's actual body. Everything else we're seeing is either, like in the original game, not necessarily this, is either a hallucination by Cloud, or it's Genova in some form or another using the black robes to materialize Sephiroth, like a portion of his consciousness. The real, what part of him is left is up frozen in a block of ice up north.
Yeah.
So he's actually mainly just like a spirit that is using the black robes and pieces of Genova to do whatever he wants.
And that, I guess, is kind of like my number one frustration with the main story of this game is, it seems like
all that stuff is coming in the next game.
None of
you
that
don't know
was answered.
No.
Yeah, in this game. This game was just kind of it. Yeah, like especially Cloud's deal. Like Cloud goes ballistic, like tries to kill Tifa, like he loses his mind multiple times. He's acting like Sephiroth has total mind control over him for like multiple points in the game.
Yeah.
And then it's like, all right, see you next week on Dragon Ball Z.
Exactly.
It's like,
no, like I said, that's a thing that also leads to one of my funniest things in a bit. How much of this do you want to be spoiled on? Like, do you want to wait for the next game to find out most of this? Or if I talk about it, would that, like, because
I mean, I don't necessarily mind you referencing the original because they're going to probably do different things.
Right. Well, yeah. Because
ultimately, like, you're speculating as well. Like, you might have theories about, like, this was how the original handled it.
Right. But okay. Yeah. That's. I just wanted to make sure because I don't want to granularly explain everything. But I there are a couple bits where I'm just like, yeah, because again, it's the trade-off of making it a trilogy. Is like there are answers to all of those. We do not get them in this game because they're 6 hours into the next game, basically. Like we'll cover that pretty shortly.
I wonder how long it'll take them to make, because like I felt like Rebirth came, Remake was 2022, or I mean 2020.
Yeah, it shouldn't take. So here's actually a thing, and this has been funny with the news with Square
Same
Enix.
engine and everything. So
no. So here's the thing, and this is the only part you've seen, of course, all the gaming news recently about the. Have you? I know it wouldn't be out yet, but having your previous podcast episodes that I haven't been published, that you talked about the Square Enix stuff that's come out where they're like shifting to more multi-platform. And
yeah, we haven't talked about it, but I have seen that.
Yeah. Okay. This is not even like a PlayStation fanboy thing. I don't care if this was on an Xbox only. I would go buy an Xbox for this. I just like Final Fantasy. That said, they have been very vocal about the fact that it's like the reason we were able to turn around from 7 to Rebirth so quickly, despite it being such an expansion, is because we didn't have to make it cross-platform. It wasn't just the PlayStation. It was just like the fact that we didn't have to try to develop it to work on 3 different consoles at once.
Yeah, just one.
Just make sure it works on the one, and then later we'll figure out the PC version. It's like, it was a huge help, and it was 97% the same staff. Like, they just straight up, like, a couple people moved on naturally, a couple people, like, quit or whatnot, but it's like, we only had to do a couple new hires. If you were to compare the credits of Remake and Rebirth, 97% the same people doing the same jobs, just, the next one. And they said that's part of the big turnaround. They do say the story is already all written for part 3. They are about to they'll probably start recording the voices for it later this year. They said they don't want to give any promises because who knows what could happen and whatnot. But I genuinely, unless they are forced, at gunpoint, like Square Enix is like, look, we need to make more money, drop this on Xbox too. I don't think it's going to be I don't think it's going to be like 2 years or anything that absurd, but I do think 3 or 4 is all we're looking at for the next one. Like, I think because it's going to be using the same map for the most part. There's a couple new areas we're going to explore that we didn't cover in this one, but they said the big thing is the airship they want to keep, because in the original Final Fantasy VII, one of the big selling points was the airship. At a certain point, you get the airship. Actually, the Highwind, you see it. I was so happy to see it in big, bright HD. And they make jokes about like, man, I'd like to fly that. You'd need an entire crew. Which my speculation on that, because Sid is going to be the one who flies the airship.
Right. Sid was just like, kind of just take a sidestep real quick. Sid was one of the points where I was like, this was an old game that looks new now, because Sid is such like a classic video game character.
I love him so much.
He's like just like the classic sky captain looking dude.
I love him so much. I think if I go to a Ren Fair again this year, I'm going to dress up as Sid. I love him so much. I also just like that, the rest of them are like 21, and Sid's like, I'm a 30-year-old man.
Sid is like, my experience with Sid now is this guy.
Uh-huh. And then
the chicken 15 with the massive tits, and then 16 where Sid
he's
is
like the best character.
The core of that game.
No, Sid being one of the recurring Final Fantasy characters is great, because every version of Sid I've ever bumped into, I'm like, I love this guy.
Or gal.
I haven't played 15 yet, so I don't know anything about her. But I do know that it's
I'm sure
a girl
you've
Sid.
seen her.
Yeah, I was going to say, she can't be on the internet.
Pretty iconic. Yeah.
But no, I love Sid. But I think the brigade you work with in the ceremony, the 7th, whatever, because there's also a side quest after that you can get where you work with them again.
Oh, nice.
It's great. I think they're going to defect and be the crew for the Highway.
That'd be cool. Yeah, definitely.
Pay off.
Like, once we're done kind of discussing the ending, I want to go through some of like our favorite moments, and that was probably like when I was playing through that whole chapter, I was like, this game is great.
That's
crazy,
it's one of the highlights. But no, they have specifically said the Highwind, they want to keep the open world, but also keep the airship that can fly anywhere and go anywhere at any time in the open world. And they're like, he said, I already have a headache thinking of how we're going to have to figure out how to program that. Especially because, talking about old video games, part of the reason that worked is because there was an overworld map that was different from the various towns and dungeons.
Yeah.
So like, it wasn't that weird in an old cartoony video game to have a ship that could go anywhere, and then you just drop your little guy on the ground, and now you're thinking like a realistic ship dropping, like it runs the risk, and this may be how they have to do it, but it runs the risk of being the buggy problem on steroids, where it's like there's a 15-second animation that has to play every time you descend from the Highwind.
Right.
And it's like, I'm sure they're cracking out of that. And the weapons that you see a little bit of, they're baby ones, so they look like big fishes. But Final Fantasy VII is hilariously, on top of everything else, a kaiju story. There are big Godzilla things that go wrecking around the game, just out in the open for a good chunk of the last third of it. And they're like, we're going to figure out how to A, put those in the game, and B, how do you fight them? Because, again, it's a thing in an old video game, in a turn-based thing. It's like, yeah, you press the button, there's this guy the size of a skyscraper who you hit with your sword. But, like, okay, when we stretch it to realistic proportions, it's like, do they keep just the little fish-looking things, or do they go the full Godzilla, like, mech-looking things they turn into? That it's
right.
Like, so they have stuff to figure out, but I do think the turnaround is going to be decent, if
probably at the very least comparable to Remake to Rebirth.
Yeah. That's kind of what I think, unless something goes wrong, and because they did have that big shakeup. So unless something goes sideways on the business side of things,
right?
I think it'll be a comparable turnaround. But yeah, oh man, that ending! It, first of all, on top of everything else, kind of topped the last game in terms of spectacle and of a final boss. Just like, holy cow, just the juggling all the different party members, Zack and Cloud teaming up.
Zack and Cloud teaming up was really cool.
Yeah.
The fight itself, I felt like just it kept going
to
the point
longest. That's why, because when I texted you, I had to go to work shortly after I finished it. And I texted you, I think, after it said, I just rolled credits on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth finally. And you said, what was your final time? And I said, I don't know, but it was about 99 hours when the save point before the final boss. And I watched the credits and then was like, all right, I gotta go. But I'm like, that final boss fight was probably at least an hour to 2 hours long. And I didn't die during it. So like, it took me 2 hours to fight this boss because I kept dying. It was the boss fight itself takes about 2 hours to play through.
Yeah, it just kept going and going and going.
And dropping new story information that your brain could not process at this moment because you're also falling through space or something.
Yeah, and I hit a point in like mid-fight with that where I just like turned the PlayStation off and went to bed because it was like 11 at night or something in my eyes. I was like, I'm just going to pick this up tomorrow.
Yep.
And I like finished it and wrapped it up the next day. But yeah, it was pretty long, but like thematically and what's happening is really cool. And like Zach and Cloud being able to team up was awesome. Yep. It like taking the fact that you've had this giant party that you've had to kind of divide into groups through the whole game and then kind of making that a mechanic at the end was cool.
Yeah. And the fact that everyone got a nice little moment where they got to work together and everything.
Yeah. I thought mechanically it worked pretty well. It was just so over the top and so long that It was like, okay, come on.
Yep. No, but there was some really cool stuff. I cheered when Aerith steps out of the portal because I was like, I kind of figured they'd pull something like that. It's still a great moment. It's just like a...
Yeah, no. It was cool.
And it also, there is a line of thought that it's like, well, Aerith being alive and during that portion of the fight, the two things that why I'm like, I think Aerith still comes out of this maybe okay. It's entirely possible. I'm in denial. But the two reasons I think is A, because there's a bit in the fight where after she's seemingly died, but maybe not died, who knows, Zach and Cloud are separated and Zach says specifically, save her. And him saying that at that moment, like from a story perspective, I'm like, if she's just dead and I'm writing this game, I don't put that in there. That's a thing you put in there where it's like, no, there's still stuff you can do. Also, people point out that during that fight with Cloud and Aerith and Sephiroth is basically trash talking Cloud the whole thing. And it's like, is this really happening? Is this all in your head? And they're like, see, Sephiroth is just saying Cloud's imagining all this. I'm like, Sephiroth is a liar who has, in the original game, just makes stuff up and lies to Cloud for fun, just to screw with him. And through the whole game, he's like, Tifa's not real. Cloud's like, you're right, she's not real. That doesn't make any sense. Tifa's like, Cloud, what are you talking about? But the one thing Sephiroth does say when she first walks out of the portal is he kind of narrows and I was like, I underestimated you. Like, it's a bit where he's like, okay, I didn't actually see that coming.
Yeah, I got the vibe, like I said earlier, that essentially Cloud is caught in the mix of Aerith and Sephiroth's chess match for like the multiverse.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of what's happening. How that resolves and what that means, what that literally means for the characters at the end of all of this, I don't know. But
I think it's really cool to see Aerith, like, she's this kind of dinky, goobery, silly girl for like all of Remake and the majority of Rebirth. Like, you know she's powerful, you know she's a Cetra, you don't fully understand what that means. And then at the end, it's just like, oh no, I've actually been doing like multiverse math and like manipulating you like the whole time to try to defeat Sephiroth.
Because the payoff, that materia, she has the white materia, is very important to the plot of the original Final Fantasy VII.
I figured, considering she has the white one and then there's a black one, it's like, this is a little on the nose.
Oh, absolutely. Well, again, it was 1997. Right. They were just going for blunt. Because I was paying attention to the whole game where they talk about, it's like the materia is clear. And then when Zack drops it at the beginning with the other Aerith, the materia is white. And it's just like, it's a kind of an interesting back and forth thing. I'm like, how are they going to pay this off? So her doing the switcheroo at the end.
Yeah, I didn't clock any of that. The video had to tell me that, like, it was like a separate, like a multiverse Aerith, like giving him the white one when the other one had been clear and all that. Yeah.
No, it was some very nice little chess because I was paying attention because, again, I've played the original. I know that white materia is basically, remember how I said, well, had Aerith not died, they could have solved this whole thing in 6 minutes. That white materia is a large part of why.
Right.
And they need it to be where it is when she dies. Like that's important. So if it was clear and therefore not working, then it's like, well, they're screwed. There's just nothing they can do. So Aerith doing multiverse shenanigans to be like, I fixed it. Here you go. It's all going to play out how it's supposed to. Is a nice little like card shuffling moment that was like had fun with the
it was
multiverse
kind of like
shenanigans.
in part 1 in Remake, Sephiroth was manipulating the multiverses and stuff, and like we didn't really know what was happening, but then at the end it kind of was shown that like, oh no, Sephiroth is trying to take things to a larger scale to correct like his mistakes or whatever. And then at the end of this game we get to see that also Aerith was doing basically the same thing. Yeah.
No. And the seeing all the different paths branch with the little rainbow effect, and you see certain things happen. It's very good. We should also talk about Zach, my good boy Zach Fair. I love him so much because he figures a lot into the crazy finale.
Yes.
Though he doesn't in the classic. I mentioned earlier I played Crisis Core, and I fell in love with Zach because Crisis Core is a very ridiculous story. Zach is, I mentioned this in the last one. Zach's funny because Cloud's like angsty and introverted and kind of weird, and he's got so many issues going on in his brain that he doesn't understand at this point. Zach is Sonic the Hedgehog. Zach is just like, let's do this. Zach is also a big dumb idiot who doesn't understand any of what's happening. So it's very funny to stick him in the middle of the multiverse stuff, because all throughout Crisis Core, there's like Sephiroth and Sephiroth's friends, and they're all like in this kind of battle of the wills, and Loveless gets involved, and there's this operatic like stuff going on. Zach doesn't understand any of it. He's a big bonehead who's just like trying to do the right thing, but also everyone keeps letting him down. There's actually some very thematically rich stuff at the end, but it's very funny for most of the game because people are monologuing him, and Zach does not get what's going. He's like, that's dumb. I don't understand. Like, what are you talking about? So sticking him in the middle of the multiverse stuff is very funny because stuff just keeps happening, and you can tell Zach's like, I don't know, man. Whatever.
Which kind of made him like a really good like avatar for the player to be like, I don't know what's going on, but also like, there's the point.
He's also more dogmatic than Cloud, because Cloud's like, I don't know what's happening. I better not say anything. Zach will be like, what's happening?
Yeah,
what is going on?
There's a point at the end where Zach has the option to like kind of take 3 different paths, and they show like the conclusion to all those paths.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of another way to give you like, they're using him as a tool to kind of show the player like what they're setting up here with this ridiculous,
with all the different kinds of dogs.
And he ends up dying in at least 1, maybe 2.
One of those things like, they're really unclear about that. Because again, we don't actually know.
I'm not sure which Zach is fighting with him with Cloud at the end.
I knew at one point, I can't remember off the top of my head, but like if you pay attention, you can pick out exactly which Zach that is.
I think it's the one that's been,
it's the main one. But
the one that's been like hanging out with Cloud and Aerith through the whole game. Yeah. But at the end, he goes to either like rescue Biggs or go get what was he trying to get from?
He was going to go find out what the deal with Cloud's illness was from Hojo. Like he was going to go confront Hojo.
Yeah. So and like if he goes one path, you see the other like timeline kind of like get nuked or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. So just a lot of weird timeline shenanigans, and when you couple that with like JRPG nonsense, there's a lot to kind of filter through and unpack.
And it's also really funny because they open with Zach, like the very first, which was really funny because before the game came out, we talked about this a little bit in the last game. They go out of their way to only have the playable characters that were playable in the original Final Fantasy VII be playable. And we knew Sephiroth was going to be playable because he is briefly playable in the same section in the Nibelheim flashback. He's briefly playable in the original.
I was going to say, I didn't know that, but it was cool to play as Sephiroth.
And it works the same way too, where like you do your attack as Cloud and it does like 300 damage, and then you do your attack as Sephiroth, he does 1400 damage, and it's like, oh yeah, he's the better one. But it was very funny because I'm sitting there like, because they were very strict. We talked about this last time. Like if you were making that same game remake today, you'd be like, Jesse should probably be playable, like bare minimum. Like there's a couple other people who should be in there. And then in the Yuffie DLC, she has a partner so they can start experimenting with the synergy stuff. But like he's not playable. You can just use him for the synergy attacks. So I'm like, they are really strict. No. And so I talked to Alex. I'm like, do you think they'll cheat because Zach was technically a playable in Crisis Core and let you play as Zach? And he's like, I don't know. That could go either way. And then he played the game first. Like he started before I did. And he said, Caleb, you should sit down and play the first chunk of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I'm like, I'm kind of tired, but I could probably do like the first couple hours tonight. And so I sat down and play it. And literally the opening of the game is Zach, which hilariously I found out later, because you know how they had a bunch of various game journalists and let's players like play the first like 8 hours of the game. They cut that section out. Like no one knew until opening day that was the opening of the game.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's yeah. But on the JRP nonsense, part of the reason that ending is so dense, they open with Zack and you intermittently play as Zack throughout the game. They do not actually start getting into the ending of Remake. You know, the big like, oh shoot, here's the plot. They don't start talking about that otherwise until the last couple chapters of the game. Like you're just playing most of the game with all these questions in your head, and you figure out about a third of the way through. I'm like, they are not going to answer a single one of these until we're almost done, are we? And they didn't. They waited until like the second to last chapter to drop a couple more things, and then everything else is just that last 2-hour fight. You're getting a very long, not terribly difficult, but like beefy JRPG boss fight. And also intermittently, they're just dropping huge plot twists and lore stuff on top of you one after the other. I loved a lot of it, but yeah, it's a lot. I also really like Cloud and Aerith's kind of last date in the other universe, where it's very clear that she's like, hey, I don't have a lot of time left. I know what's about to happen. I just want to hang out for a little bit before everything has to end. It's a very nice moment. It's just a great bit of unsettling as like you're right there towards the end, and you're the dread just sinks in so much during it because it's, you know, cute, fun character stuff. I also jokingly yelled at the television because, you know, every time Cloud tried to pick something, they'd be like, "Oh, sorry, you can't have that. Have this instead." It's like, all right, it's funny.
I think something that's kind of interesting about all of that ending stuff is that we've talked about like there's multiple Zacks, multiple Aeriths, multiple like Sephiroths, or like one major Sephiroth manipulating multiple timelines. It feels like it's all happening to one Cloud.
Yes, like there's
a core Cloud.
There's a kind of an implication, because the big question for all the Zack scenes early on is, looks like everyone's dead, but that didn't make a whole lot of sense because like, did the plot of Final Fantasy VII up to that point happen in that universe? How's that work without Cloud? Because he's dragging an unconscious Cloud with him for most of the game. And there's like a subtle implication that like Cloud is bouncing back and forth between the two bodies. Like that, like...
Yeah, because when they like fall, when like Sephiroth knocks them off that thing, he wakes up in that like unconscious Cloud's body that's been in the wheelchair for the whole game, and Aerith is like takes over that body. So it's like, are there universes where like the subconscious or the soul of the characters is kind of dormant until it takes over?
Well, because that's another thing that they'll have to get into more, because we don't know how expansive these multiverses are. Is it just straight up like old comic book multiverses where it's like, oh yeah, this is Earth 2 or whatever, it's exactly the same except for this change, or this is Earth 3 or 4? Or
that would imply that like 6 or 7 Clouds could team up.
Right. Is it one of those things? Or is it kind of a thing where like it's more of a dreamlike what if sort of thing that you can tap into a little bit, but it's not like a full fleshed out? Because like during the one where Zack goes to save Biggs, they talk for a little bit. The world's dead. Like he's just like, there's nothing here. It's like this place isn't really real. Which also then leads to, on their last date, Cloud and Aerith looking up at the broken, shattered sky. Which is a thing from the original game, which I have no idea what any of that's going to end up meaning. But then Cloud sees the broken, shattered sky, and no one else can at the end. So there's like 18 different things happening, and we don't know the answer to almost any of them. There's even, again, the fact that it's like the Marlene that Zack was talking to seemingly knows what's going on and is like, you have to make Cloud better, or Aerith will die because a silver-haired man is going to kill her. Which, again, is really funny because from Zack's perspective, just going off of Crisis Core, he knows exactly who Sephiroth is. He's like, that guy's dead. That guy, he has no clue. Again, Zack doesn't understand anything. But like I said, in the original, Cloud kills him there after the Nibelheim thing, at the Nibelheim confrontation. Zack is there. Like, Zack tries to kill him, fails, Cloud does. So there's probably a part of Zack's like, well, Sephiroth's not a good, like, Sephiroth's dangerous and was going insane, but he's like, I believe you, Marlene. We're going to go fix this. We're going to save them both. But you could tell a little bit on Zack's face. He's like, sure, man. I guess he isn't dead, actually. Whatever.
Yeah, I guess the next kind of like logical question is, do you think that they will successfully land this plane?
I do think, because I talked about it with Alex a little bit, Kingdom Hearts is very notoriously, to compare it, because that's their other big action RPG series going on right now. And that's probably, if I'm being honest, before we get the next Final Fantasy anything, we're probably going to get Kingdom Hearts 4. That's probably their next big thing they're going to start rolling out. Maybe even starting this summer is when we start getting more information. But Kingdom Hearts, very notoriously, the writers have admitted, we don't plan out that far ahead. We write ourselves into corners, and then the next game, we have fun trying to get ourselves out of that corner. Like, that's how we think this is fun to do. That's just how we do it. We've talked to Alex. It's like, they're very intentionally not doing that with this. This is not like they're pulling rabbits out of a hat, and the next game they have to explain what they meant. There is very clearly, we're setting stuff up to pay it off. We are asking questions we want you to be thinking about, and then we will get to them. I do think they have a plan. I do think they're going to, and I genuinely, these games are great. I love them. They're made by incredibly talented people. They are masterclasses at doing exactly what they're doing. I think it will be good. Do I think they will stick the landing? I do think they've done a really, really great job so far of like capturing the spirit of the original Final Fantasy VII and even fleshing it out, making it better. It's going to be very much open to interpretation. I won't be surprised if this ends up being like a thing like, for me, Lost was, where the first time I watched the ending of Lost, I was like, I don't like that very much. And it took me a couple of years to be like, okay, there's still some clunky bits and bits I don't like. I do actually really like the ending. I do actually really get what they were going for here. I think there's a small possibility they stick the landing. However, I do think if they stick the landing, it is going to be incredibly divisive. Like, I think the only way you can stick the landing is going to piss people off in one way or another.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's kind of just been the discourse around this game just in general, is the people who are purists and wish it was just a true remake.
Just a straight remake. Well, because it's funny, because the one part of this game that is funny is you listen to the interviews with the head guys, is they occasionally disagree. There are like a couple of them that like, we should just try to do this as strictly thing as possible. And a couple of them are like, no, we're going to shake things up. We're going to try this or this.
Before we get out of spoilers, I think it would be fun to kind of talk about some of like the bigger moments that stand out in our minds, like throughout the game. I think we've talked about, or we touched on early, where like Cloud and Tifa and Aerith dress up as soldiers.
Yeah, I love that bit so much.
That part was probably the point where I was like, yes, this is a fantastic video game.
No, and it's fun because it's one of the minigame sections, or one of the like kind of goofball sections. It's like kind of perfectly deployed. Like you had just been doing a bunch of like side quest and combat stuff. And so this is like just the right length of being an ice breakup. It's a hangout thing and whatnot. I actually think I love Costa del Sol. I can see why you were frustrated with it, because it comes right after this. So it's like, you have not been doing like a straight up normal section of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for hours by the time you're wrapping up Costa del Sol.
You do get Bikini Tifa though, and that's the payoff. So
it is funny though, because I actually love the various summer outfits. I want that Chocobo shirt, the one that Cloud can wear.
Of course you do.
I have looked for it. I checked the Square Enix store. I found one place that does like their own ripoff version of it. I'm like, no, I want a nice quality like Chocobo shirt like that. I love it so much. I wear Hawaiian shirts all the time. I'm literally wearing a Banana Republic button up right now.
It's true. I can see it.
Yeah. I have to say, both ladies look lovely in their swimwear. I don't love either of Tifa's. I kind of wish they had like, I don't love either of Aerith's either. Like they're fine. It's kind of a weird half thing, like sexy, but also like, is this a thing a person would wear?
Well, no.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. It's just like, it's kind of a weird half thing of like, we'll try to dress it up so it would be an actual thing. But yeah, that whole section was just fun though. I like the fact that eventually you unlock costume changes for everyone, and you can change them at any point, like in the post game. Because you make Barrett wear a sailor suit all the time if you want to. It's fun.
Yeah, his costume was hilarious.
I also like that he was insistent on it. It wasn't like he's like, oh, it's the only thing I could find. And then later on, they're like, do you want to wear it? And he's like, I like the sailor suit. I think it's good.
They're like, Barry, you can change. He's like, nah, I'm good.
I'm fine.
Yeah, no, that section was really like sticks out in my mind. And then you mentioned Barrett's like core storyline.
Yeah.
I think that like all of that was really well done story-wise. The game, like I enjoyed all of the beats. It brought up one of the things that I think is an issue with the flow of the game, which is anytime you play as just one character, it feels bad. Barrett, especially in that boss fight at the end, I thought that was terrible.
See, I see where you're coming from. I kind of disagree, but I also realize I did not realize, like, apparently everyone in the world, and I saw even in your notes, everyone in the world hates the box throwing section with Kate Sith.
The Kate Sith section was god-awful.
See, the funny thing is, I enjoyed it, and I did not realize that was a weird opinion until I got online afterwards, and everyone's like, yeah, but the freaking box section sucked so bad. And I was like, don't get me wrong, I think it was one of the weaker ones, but I kind of had a good time with its little puzzle solving, like...
But for me also, like, I just found his character to be really annoying, and maybe that comes from the fact that he's a cat, and maybe it just went a little too far anime for me, or maybe I just like thought that his personality was irritating, but then being forced to play as just him for like an hour.
I like that a bit because it reminds me of like an old, like, not Banjo-Kazooie, but like Ty the Tasmanian, like one of the knockoff kind of like PS2 era 3D platformers. And I was like, I kind of have a little bit of nostalgia for this sort of like, not amazing, but kind of like clunky, but goofy, that sort of thing.
I felt like it really only showed its like rough edges in boss, like the ending of Barrett's thing and then the ending of Kate Sith's thing.
The Kate Sith boss fight, when you fight the two guys.
Yeah.
That took me several tries.
Yeah.
That's maybe
because the combat is centered on your being able to swap and synergize and all these things. And then when they remove that and you only have the one character.
Yes. And if it's not a character, because I will admit I had been using Kate Sith a little bit. That was my first time spending a lot of time with Kate Sith. And so I did not really understand the ins and outs of him as a character, which I think is partially why they do that, to force you to kind of be like...
They're like, we know you don't want to play as this guy, so we're going to make you...
We started you out with Barrett and Tifa and like and Aerith, and you've just been relying on them. But we want you to figure out these other characters too. So
I really liked Red 13 and, like I said earlier, Yuffie.
Yeah.
Just as like in combat. Yeah. Especially.
How'd you like Red 13's dungeon? Because I love that one so much. It reminded me of Sphinx and the Cursed Mummy.
That was going to be like one of the next moments I brought up was the whole Red 13 arc was just weird as hell to me. Like all of a sudden he's like 12 and talking in this weird little boy voice. And I'm like, what the hell is happening right now?
No, that one's interesting because some of that's baked into it. Like the voice changing thing was a very clever way of putting into text what was subtext in the original game, which is that Red 13 was playing himself off as older. And it wasn't until they got to Cosmo Canyon, home of one of the greatest musical scores in any video game, in their version of it. And this kicks so much butt. Which, again, we haven't really covered it. But I said this about the last game, one of my favorite video game scores. Same goes for this one. Such great music all the way through.
Yeah, this game had bow, wow, wow, bow, wow, wow.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's like, it's not even the best song, but it's very funny they made a song that went that hard for 2 side quests.
Well, Barrett's crying about being a good father.
Yes.
It's bow, wow, wow in the background.
I cracked up when the Kiri side quest, when she has you like take care of those guys and her stupid theme song that she made up is playing while you're fighting those guys. Thought that was hilarious.
Yeah.
And that's the only time in the game it plays. I'd done the rest of her side quest chains and it's like, that never comes up again. I'm like, that's so funny. And then the jazz theme for Queen's Blood also just rules. It goes really hard.
Could have been nice to have a couple songs that rotate in and out of Queen's Blood like they do for Gwent.
Although if you do listen to the soundtrack, it is like a 7-minute long song. So it's like, you do start to feel it being a little repetitive, but like they tried to pad it out.
I mean, it's 7 minutes, but it always starts the same.
Yes.
So it's like you're always hearing those first 3 minutes at the very least.
No, the Red 13 stuff is also funny because the other half of that, all of the stuff involving... I can't remember the name, but the when you go to the City of the Dead, basically, and
I don't remember their names.
Yeah,
either.
That's all new. Like they were in the original.
Yeah, I was wondering about all that.
The Gi were in the original, but that was kind of like implied background stuff, like they talk about.
You didn't interact with them.
You never interacted with them. You didn't really get much more of their deal other than they were the tribe that invaded that killed Red 13's father. Like all of that completely new. They're completely, which is also one of those things I'm like, they are going somewhere with this. I am very curious to see where in the next game, because when I got to that section, like, this is like, in the original, like, you got Red 13's backstory, you finally got it, and you got the context that, oh, he's kind of just a kid. Like, he's been playing as like, oh yeah, I'm like 50 years old. And it's like, in the context of his species, that means nothing. He is basically a 12-year-old. But like, you get that, you see the statue, or not the statue, but his father's body. He gets told the whole story of what happened, and then you move on. The whole thing where they start going to the city of the dead and everything, and I was like, well, and then you start finding out more about the Gi and the Cetra, and they tie it in to the black materia, which, by the way, works very differently in this game than it did in the original. The black materia in the original game. Then that also has to do with some of the changes they made to Kate Sith. So in the original game, Kate Sith is kind of an a-hole. He basically, when the plot twist that he's working for Shinra the whole time comes up, he basically forces you to take him with you after that. Basically at gunpoint, it's like, I have Marlene and Aerith's mom on standby. I can have them killed. You have to take me with you.
The cat?
Because it's Reeves, that back at the, in the Shinra headquarters, the one kind of nice normal guy in the Shinra, like, top executives. That's who is Kate Sith. Like, he's controlling Kate Sith the entire time. Which they kind of make clear. There's a big moment where they explicitly make it clear early on in the next game, but like, they kind of show their hand at that a little bit in this game, because it cuts to Kate Sith's like, I'll get it done back at my job, and then it shows Reeves being the one typing up and changing their like wanted posters.
Yeah, I didn't even put that together.
Yeah, like I said, it's not. I knew it going in, so I thought, oh, that must be how they tell people who didn't know this, because they make it explicit. He works for Shinra, but he's like, I'm kind of defecting. And
that,
like,
I mean, that helps a lot. Like, that helps ease my mind a lot. Just that, like, there is a reason, or like a person behind, as opposed to just, why don't we just have the token anime animal companion?
Yeah,
like,
he's a robot cat,
cute little cat thing that has to be there. Like, I got that he was a robot, obviously, like his sacrifice. Oh my god, when he comes running in and he like saves the day, I was so irritated. I was like, God, I was hoping we were done with this stupid cat. I thought that,
no,
which I knew we wouldn't be, because he is playable. It's like, they're not gonna let me invest all this like skills and stuff into a character for him to be gone forever. But I was still like, when he come running back in to get his hero's moment, I was like, you don't deserve this. I don't care about you. I don't like you. I hope you get crushed.
Three things about that are funny. Is one, it's funny because that is the bit with Aerith in the original game, is they let you invest all this time and they're like, actually, she's dead for good now. And it's like, for the rest of the game, you're just looking at those empty inventory spots. You're like, that hurts still, actually. Also, the Kate Sith sacrifice is funny on a couple bits. One of which is, I really like the tweak they made to it, where he's made much more sympathetic. He's not like, in the original game, the arc is sort of that he is like won over by the group. And he's like, well, I was kind of just doing this, but he's like, I guess I kind of like you guys eventually, and like fully sides with them by the end. Having him be like, from the get-go, kind of more sympathetic to them, and like his excuse for betraying them was like, hey, whoever goes in that temple ends up dead, and I kind of thought it was better that the Turks die than you. And that was his sort of thing. I did really like that, like at the end, Cloud like comforts him a little bit. He's like, it's gonna be okay. He's like, oh, thanks. He's like, so you're not mad? He's like, oh no, I'm still pissed, but we have other things to deal with right now. And he's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
I did like that part. Yeah.
But the other thing, his sacrifice moment is such a weird moment in the original game. It had to have been a translation thing. Other fun moment in the original game, in the English translation they released in '97, Sung, the head of the Turks, and probably easily the most sympathetic, they just implied he dies there when he gets injured at the end in the original game.
I did think it was odd that he's like, well, I got paperwork to do. Let me stand up with my fatal wound and walk out of here.
No, and what was funny is when he got up and I'm like, Alex, did they change that? He's like, I'm pretty sure, because he's like, I'm pretty sure Sung dies here in the original. Did they change that? And I looked up, it's like, in Japan, he always lived through that. Like, they always mention at the end of the game, like, yeah, he's in the hospital making a recovery. They cut that bit out of the English one, so the implication is he's just dead in the English one.
That kind of brings to light, like, just I get that this game is silly and that it's of an era, but there are so many times, I talked about this on a neighborhood watch, where it's just like, there's no realistic way for our party to be in this pathetic jail cell with these goons. Like, we could just bust out and kill everybody in this camp. There's no way that this guy should stand back up. Like, there's just a lot of things just happen because they said so, or because to serve the plot. And it's like, you have to accept that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to have a miserable time.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just so many things where it's like, we need this to happen for reasons. It's like, and certain points, I was like, it would make me roll my eyes and I'd be like, oh, okay, I guess we're doing this. And then other times I thought it was funny, or like had a purpose that was worth the ridiculousness.
It's absolutely the case, because there's absolutely a bit of like, I don't like the term ludonarrative dissonance. Whenever we start talking about that, my eyes glaze over, because usually people talk about it with stuff that's like, all of the main video game characters are mass murderers because they kill 600 people over the course of the video game. And like, that's because it's a video game. And once it's an action game where you kill people, it's just sort of like, yeah, it's like a sport, man. You kind of have to think of it not in terms of like, is this a realistic thing that would happen? It's like, no. Die Hard isn't a realistic action movie. No one would actually survive that. The first Die Hard, he only kills like 12 guys through the whole movie. And it's like, yeah, that's absurd. That wouldn't happen like that. So no, in a video game where it's like, you have 17 diehards every hour, it's like, yeah, no, this is over the top. Ludonarrative dissonance does come up with stuff like that, where like I had so over leveled to the point where I was like crushing most things I was fighting, and then like you said, you get held up in a little jail cell, and I'm like, I care more about the thematics and the character work and the gameplay than I do specific like plot hole stuff. Whatever, if that's got to be what happens to incite the next little chunk of it. But I'm like, no, if they were like, Cloud's like, we can't fight our way out of this, I'm like, I'll accept it, because like I said, I have trained myself. I don't care about that stuff. But I'm like, it is ridiculous, because if you actually put me in a room in a combat situation with just 3 of my guys and these 20 dudes, I would win in 8 seconds.
Yeah.
Like, that is actually the payoff. One of the ways in that section where you get, one of the ways you can get the fruit is some guys are like, yeah, come meet us in this back alley.
Yeah, I did that, and one.
You annihilate them in 3 seconds, because even just Cloud on his own at that point is
and
so
they're like,
powerful.
just kidding.
And they're like, oh man, we did not, you should have told us. We were so out of your league. We're sorry. Have this. We're going to go now. It's like, I'm like, that's funny, because that is actually how I feel like the whole plot should go. Is he's like, what are you going to do? We have you locked up. And it's like, well, Barrett's going to shoot you with his gun arm.
Yeah.
And then we're going to go home.
Cloud is a soldier with this giant sword on his back that can essentially teleport.
Yes.
Like the way he can zip around a battlefield. Yeah.
It's yeah, no. So there's some very good bits, but yeah, no. Sung in the original died in the English translation, and so they're like, yeah, he's fine. But there's a weird bit in the English translation where, like, when Cait Sith makes a sacrifice, he's like, I want you to remember me. He's like, there's going to be another Cait Sith, but it will not be the same. He's like, there's only ever been one just like me, and I want you to never forget me for that. You will see another Cait Sith. It will be a different. He's like, it's all a bunch of robot bodies, but there will never be another Cait Sith like me. And I'm like, that's always stuck with me, because I'm like, it's such a weird, poignant moment. But also, it's a thing you think about for 3 seconds. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It is just Reeves back at home controlling a robot. What are we talking about? So the way they play it in this makes so much more sense, where they're all shocked, and then he's like, guys, I'm a robot. I have like 1,000 bodies back home. Of course I was going to be the one to stay behind and hold the button up. What do you mean? It's like, that makes more sense. The other one was like I said, weirdly poignant, and like kind of stopped me in my tracks the first time I played it, but also was like, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Yeah. So
I think the last like big moment that I want to touch on for sure in spoilers is chapter 12, kind of like the whole chapter, because that's where you get to go on a date with a companion. It's the whole, you get a musical number from Aerith that was really incredible. You get the like play, the like knights and
yes, you get Loveless, which is actually
play.
A big payoff, because you can see posters for Loveless in the original game. A big part of Crisis Core's part is the main villain of that game, who I genuinely kind of hope shows up in part 3 somehow. I love him so much. He's the most ridiculous man in the world, is obsessed with the great work of literature Loveless that has been adapted into an opera. And it's just like, so a thing where you actually get to kind of see bits of it. Because in the original game, you play through a little play when you go to the Golden Saucer, but it's very clearly a dinky kind of children's play thing. And it's like when they really spice it up, and it's like, actually a little mad you can't get Cloud's outfit from that as like one of his things.
Right.
He's like, this is pretty good.
Yeah, no, I thought that whole chapter, like, I was starting to get worn down by the game, and then I went into chapter 12 and was like, this is what I wanted. Like, this is what I'm waiting. Like, these are the moments that bring me back.
This chapter 12 is also kind of the culmination. We talked about the whole game is kind of geared towards building up the bonds with these different characters. It's a major aspect of not just the plot of the game, but like the mechanics of the game is all about bonding with these people. So you get a chapter that pays that off, where it's like whoever you've bonded with the most is who you're going to go on this date with. And you get a lot of, I've checked out the other, like I said, I took Aerith, but I checked out a lot of the other ones. Some great character stuff. Some stuff that I'm kind of, there's actually, I have to touch on this. They probably touched up on it in one of the videos you watched on the ending. Some actually pretty major story stuff is in Red 13's. If you take Red 13 as your companion, he like mentions the fact that he's like, oh yeah, me and Aerith have been talking. And he's like, first of all, if you ever hurt her, I'll kill you. He's like, I really like Aerith, Cloud. So like, shape up. And Cloud's like, oh, okay. He's like, second of all, he's like, yeah, me and Aerith both have kind of a limited foresight. We can kind of see the future. And neither of us been able to do that since we left Midgar. And she think it might be connected to her materia being clear or whatnot. And it's like, that's actually really interesting and essential information that I did not know until after I beat the game and then rewatched a couple of these bits. It was like, whoa, hang on. That actually seems like something I should have known earlier. That's interesting.
Right,
That's
to hide it behind an optional.
Yeah, but you even get really fun stuff with like Yuffie, which is a very funny date because like Yuffie's clearly way too young for Cloud, so it's not actually really a date. Like she plays it up because that's just who she is as a person of like, I'm incredibly attractive. Of course you're attracted to me. And Cloud's like, someone take this annoying child away from me. Yep. They have one of my favorite dynamics in the entire game because it is giant, tired older brother, obnoxious kid sister energy where she roasts him constantly. The bit where, did you get the bit where he's like, how come you can't make doppelgangers of like, she's like, I could make a dozen Barretts. And he's like, yeah, and we'd all get killed in the crossfire. She's like, I could make a bunch of Tifas. And Cloud's like, oh. She's like, you perv. And he's like, I didn't say anything. Shut up. But they had
we were all thinking it.
Yeah, I know. There's some great stuff like that. There's a bit, they all have a nice moment in front of Jesse's portrait. Yuffie's is my favorite because like they have like him and Tifa have a really sweet conversation about it. Him and Aerith have a really nice conversation about it. He kind of looks at it and Yuffie's like, who's that? She's like, I think I met her when I was in Midgar. And he's like, yeah, she's a good friend of mine. You have friends? It's like some good bits in there. But it does get you to that nice little date and some really good character work and really fleshes them out. Barrett's was Alex's favorite in the original, like, because it's really funny. Because in the original, it's played entirely for comedy where, like, if you're closest with Barrett when that happens and you go on the Barrett just sort of sits there and he's like, you need to get your act together. There are two gorgeous women who are with our party. Why are you not doing this with them? And Cloud's like, I didn't think about that. They have a similar kind of funny bit if you aren't close with anyone, because Kate Sith he comes in so late that he's not part of the bonding system they have for everyone else. So if you're not really bonded with anyone, if you've not really been playing the game right and have just been skipping all of that stuff, Kate Sith, Vincent, and Sid go with you and they have a terrible time. Like Kate Sith is trying to like, let's have fun, guys. Cloud's checked out. Vincent Valentine, one of my favorite characters in fiction, doesn't know what's going on and doesn't think any of this is funny or fun or anything. He doesn't get it. And Sid kind of was expecting something else. He falls asleep during the play, and then when they are in the thing, he's like, oh, this is a kid's ride. I thought it was like a roller coaster. Oh. And so like Kate says, aren't we having fun? And everyone else is in the thing just miserable. He's like, oh.
Do we get to see why Vincent Valentine is one of your favorite characters in the next game?
Yes, although they did great with his 30 seconds. I love him so much. I have to stress this precisely because he is the most ridiculous man. Like, he is dressed like a Castlevania vampire. He's actually some sort of werewolf. He's super dramatic all of the time, even to the point where they kind of roast Cloud. It's like, oh, great, another, moody loner. And Cloud's like, yeah, right. And he looks, he's like, you're talking about me? And you're like, yeah. Also, his normal weapon is just a gun. It's very, not even like a fancy sci-fi. It's just like something you'd go get at like Dick's Sporting Goods. It's very funny to me. And they handle him great in there where they're just like, no, this guy's inherently kind of funny. Like the bit where he's like all dramatic rising out of the coffin. And he's like, I got to scan your key card. Hang on. How does this work? And Kate's like, you're doing it wrong. He's like, no, hang on. I got this. he kind of almost doesn't fit. He's like I just find him funny because he's tagging along with these guys. Both him, I have to stress, both him and Yuffie in the original are completely optional. You do not have to get them. You will meet Yuffie in the plot regardless. She doesn't show up after a certain point if you do not recruit her. I don't think you ever have to meet Vincent, which is really funny because I'm sure they'll get into it in the next game. Vincent's backstory is tied to everything. Like, Vincent is actually super important, but he's completely optional. But if you don't go digging into the backstory of, like, who's Sephiroth's biological mother who gave birth to him is, it's like, that's the woman Vincent was in love with, and, like, she left him to marry Hojo. And it's like this whole thing where, like, he then felt she still had feelings for him and hired him on to do security, and that's why he's where he is, sort of thing. And he's actually like hundreds of years old. Like, there's a whole lot of complicated Vincent Valentine lore that's just like, that's so funny because, like, he's just this weird, goofy edgelord, Dracula man with a gun. That he's also very handy because that's his limit break in the original game, is turning into the giant monster thing you fight, and it's like he just kills stuff. I'm like, I always had Vincent with me. I like Vincent.
I could see why. Is there any other moments you want to touch on before we move into our verdicts?
I think the main ones for me is I do really like the everything in Costa del Sol. I think the beach scene at the end of it, where you talk to everyone and kind of check in on everyone, is really good. I do actually like, we talked a little bit about the various character dungeons. I do actually like the last dungeon in the game a lot, because it's very Zelda-ish. It's very like you're in this big thing. It's got a central mechanic of like the rotating gravity, and you kind of go through, and then you find an actual dragon, and it's such a cool bit. I still really like all the characters. Like I said, I love Elena. I even was kind of like, oh, hey, I missed, weirdly enough, what's his name? The more obnoxious Turk.
Not Rude, the other one.
Yeah, I can't remember his name right now. But yeah, that was part of
the red-haired guy.
Yeah, that was part of the original game too. Is he was gone for a chunk because he got injured in the Midgar stuff, and then he comes back when he comes back in this. So that's why they took the new rookie out instead, was Elena. I loved after they were leaving the Barrett stuff and they're doing the car chase, and Elena like jumps off of a helicopter onto the hood of the car and is like, pull over, and she has the energy of, like, you know, at college there was always that one kid that was like, I want an A+ no matter what. If I get a 96, it'll kill me. That's her. She's doing all this stuff and she's always mad. She's like, I gotta be better. I gotta be perfect.
Right.
Very funny. I'm trying to think. I also like the Red 13 Temple. I just kind of had a great time with most. As much as I'll rag on Chadley being most, I kind of like how the stuff was laid out to an extent where, like, it was always pretty easy to go through my checklist of like what I needed to do.
The open world was set up as a checklist. Like you saw your progress for everything you did. Like you filled in another bubble. Like I enjoy that as an open world player. And I could see myself going back and working on the checklist over time.
It was very, and I don't normally like I've complained for other open world games how I don't like how I'm running errands. This was one I think had a good balance of, like, for most of the open world, we talked during the break, you and me, about Gungaga not being the case. I kind of just enjoyed poking around the different areas, the various chocobo stuff, like the chocobos in Nibelheim. I don't know if you got the chocobos in Nibelheim. Best chocobos in the game. You just kind of fly wherever. It's great. Because they do a thing where, like, if you're over water.
Oh,
which,
yeah. I got those. Yeah, I thought that mechanic was really fun.
Yes. No, it's great. But navigating most of the world, I was fine with. I had a good time with. Gungaga is the opposite. Some of the best music in the entire game.
Yep.
And I have to actually bring up the one payoff for a Crisis Core thing. I was waiting until the spoiler section. I completely forgot to bring it up. Sisame in this. She's not in the original. She is Turk who kind of looked the other way to help Zack out because she became good friends with Zack, who I guess he asked, one of the last things he asked her to do before he went to his original game, Death, was like, could you look out for my parents for me? Like, could you check? So finding her in Gungaga, which again is greatly expanded. In the original game, you go to Gungaga. Sisame's not there because they hadn't conceived of her as a character yet until...
Makes sense.
Yeah. So System A is not there, but you kind of just get this weird thing where it's like you go there, and at that point you don't know anything about Zack. You haven't had the actual what really went down in Nibelheim segment yet. So Cloud doesn't know who Zack is, and you go to Nibelheim, you meet his parents, you talk to a couple things, you see like a little plaque in memory of our missing boy Zack and whatnot, and Aerith and Tifa both know who he is and are kind of just sad about it. And Cloud's like, I know, Aerith, you said that was your ex? Tifa, how do you know Zack? And she's like, how do you... He came to the village while you were gone. Because, again, as the big part of this game is, which they'll explain next time, there's a very specific reason Tifa is like, you weren't there. Why do you keep saying you were there? Because in her brain, she's like, I remember this. Who he's talking about is this guy named Zack who came for a couple days in the village. Like, that's who I met. That's who was with Sephiroth. What's Cloud talking about? Which is also even really funny because one of the most infamous things Zack does is like when he gets stressed, he exercises. So he does the squats. So in the flashback that when Cloud's telling the story and Cloud's all hyperactive and doing squats, and I'm like, he's absolutely remembering this wrong. It's great. Like they were already laying the seeds for like you can see the shifts. I also, yeah, those are kind of the highlights. I enjoyed seeing the little bits and tweaks and everything and how they're layering and stuff. Even stuff from Advent Children, which is funny because that's a sequel. And I'm like, oh, okay, they're already setting some of this up.
Yeah. Final thought from me is the chicken minigame in Gongaga can go to hell.
On the one hand, yes. On the other hand, funniest payoff.
The payoff, when it ended, I was like, okay, maybe my pain and suffering is worth it. That was pretty funny, but...
Yeah. Oh, no, it is miserable. There was one bit.
The minigame was so stupid.
There was one bit, because they do... I was so worried, Andrew. I was so worried when I get to that last one. And I was like, you fight the little fight and whatnot.
Oh, yeah, that you would have to drag it all the way back to town.
Yeah, and then because
I had the thought too. I was
like, oh my goodness. And then it tells me, I'm like, oh, thank goodness. Because I actually, as someone who enjoyed 90% of the mini games they tossed at you, that was one that I did not enjoy. The payoff's so good, but had they made me do, I would have been so mad. So mad.
And I could have seen them doing that because of some of the other tedious stuff they make.
There's a couple bits in there where, like you said, and I say this as someone who's about to give this game a very high regard ranking, there are some bits in that they just push it a hair too far, where you're like, this would have been really good if instead of being this 9-minute long thing, it was a 7-minute long thing. You had to add those extra 2 minutes in there, and it's like, not as much, a little overstayed its welcome a hair.
Exactly.
Oh, the last thing I have to talk about, because this was a standout, Gilgamesh. I love Gilgamesh. You didn't did the proto relic stuff that Chadley, those side quests?
I did a bunch of them.
Okay, so
I didn't finish that quest.
So this is a fun thing that I didn't realize until I got into it. Gilgamesh is one of the only characters in the Final Fantasy franchise who is in multiple games, and it's not like Sid where it's like different names for different guys, like the same name for different guys, like a thematic thing. It's the same dude in most of them. In Final Fantasy V, he's basically the main henchman of the final boss. And at the end of the game, he's obsessed with collecting weapons and stuff like that. And he kind of gets sent into another dimension to just go on a long journey through dimensions. And so they've paid that off every once in a while in one of the games. He's not in the original 7 either, but they've had it pay off every once in a while in another game. It'll be like, Gilgamesh is here. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's looking for famous weapons. And he kind of is a little hazy about what he's supposed to be doing because he can't quite remember because of the stuff that happened in 5. So the entire arc there with him was very funny because he went from being like, who's that guy? I do some research. And I'm like, oh, okay. By the end of it, I'm like, this is now one of my favorite Final Fantasy characters. This guy's a moron and I love him.
Yeah, I did the, like I said, I did the first 3 zones.
Yeah.
So I'd gotten up to that point.
Yes. I will say if later you want to do some post-game stuff, really great. And you get him as a summon. That's your reward for going through the whole quest line. Maybe some of the toughest battles in the entire game are the last chunk before you fight him to get him as a summon. Because what you do you go through all the proto relic stuff. You eventually get in the open sea. There's a cave you can go through that's blocked off until you get all the pieces and everything unlocked. You go to his own island in this little cave.
Mm-hmm.
And before you can get to the courtyard where you fight him, you have to go to these 3 shrines. And at each of those 3 shrines, you fight a battle. And those 3 battles are 2 of the summons of the game each. So like you have to have leveled up all of your summons all the way, but then you do have to fight like Titan and Phoenix at the same time, and then freaking Alexander and the big yak thing at the same time, and then Bahamut and Odin at the same time. Like, it's incredibly difficult fights. Like, it took me longer than the final boss did. Like, out of my 25 to 30 post-game hours, a good 5 of them were just that. I started much earlier, actually, because I loved his stuff so much that once I unlocked it, I was like, I'm going to go do the Gilgamesh stuff before I even finished the game.
Right.
And then I hit the roadblock of, like, I fought the first battle, and when I realized it was 2 summons at once, I'm like, well, maybe they'll be slightly easier because there's 2 of them. Like, they'll cheese it so, like, it's not
tone
as much
them down, yeah.
Yeah, no. And so I got my butt handed to me trying twice. Like, I even tweaked all my material, like, all right, let's go. And I just got wiped out. And so I went and finished the game, did a whole bunch of side content and beefed my characters up, like, leveled up some stuff, really tweaked some stuff. And then I went back for that.
Yeah.
This is one of the last things I did before I was like, I'm taking a break now.
Yeah, I can see why. Cool. Well, all that being said, let's go ahead and roll into our verdicts for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So the way that we rate games on the podcast and our YouTube channel is with the classic A through F grading scale, but above A there is S tier. S tier is a masterpiece. So with S being a masterpiece and F being hot garbage, Caleb, where would you rate Final Fantasy VII Rebirth?
S. I think, again, I think it's one of the greatest games ever made. I have had more fun with this than any game in the past 5 years, the only exception being Tears of the Kingdom. This is a big one for me. I enjoyed this a lot. Until I realized I have other things I have to do with my life.
You just realized that?
Yeah. But I was like, I think I'm going to try to get the platinum for this. I think I'm going to go through and do all this stuff. Like I was like looking up hard mode strategies because I was going to go through it on hard mode.
That is a mark of the love of a video.
Yeah, no, I was just like, I think I'm going to try to platinum this because I was having so much fun with it. And then I had a couple roadblocks of like things that were just like a hair too difficult, and I do have to really spend some time in cracking them. And I was like, I have been playing this game for 130 hours. I still haven't touched Baldur's Gate or Alan Wake 2. And I was like, I did actually really want to play Final Fantasy 16, which is what I jumped into next. So I'm like, I think I need to take a break. I may come back to this later if I have like a gap where I don't have anything to play. But like, I do deeply love this game. I love these characters. I love this world. And I think it has plenty of flaws. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, there's no issues with this game. There's tons. But I think on the whole, I just like what they're going for enough that I'm kind of willing to be like, yeah, man, the stupid chicken game or like Gears and Gambits is more fun in concept than it is actually playing. That's the proto relic quest for Cosmo Canyon. Is you have this again similar to how they made you play Fort Condor. Cosmo Canyon just invents an entire new mini game that you play through. It's fine.
For me, this game for me is definitely a lot of ups and downs. You mentioned the characters. I love the characters. I love the world. I like the zany nonsense. And I figured talking to you and getting some context for things would help me kind of wrestle with my score. And it did. I think that for me, like this game is a solid B. Like
that makes sense.
It's a good game. I had fun. I finished it, but I definitely like hit a point where I was ready to finish it. There were definitely, we talked about arcs earlier. There were points where it was like, I need to take a break. I'm going to go play something else. Then I'll come back and then I would get it really into it again for that arc. And so I just think with like the pacing and the momentum and just kind of the structure of the game and the sort of throw everything at the wall mentality, there was a lot of stuff that didn't work very well for me. But then there was a lot of stuff that did work and that I really enjoyed. And I still am really invested in the characters and the story and the larger plot, and I want to see how it all wraps up in the third game. So I had a good time with it. I wish that it clicked for me the way that it clicked for you. I'm happy for you that it's like a new all-timer. For me, it was just a good video game that I had some fun with and I had some frustrations with. And so it kind of lands it in that B territory, like, which, is not a bad thing.
No, absolutely not. That's actually, it's really funny. We've talked about this, the Mario movie, where I'm like, it's funny because some of my friends hate it. And I'm like, it's fine. And then I know you're like, I think it was probably one of the better versions they could have done of that. I'm like, I could have been better, but like, it's fine. Like, I don't dislike that movie. It's fine. Like, it's good. Actually, there's some stuff in there I like a lot. There's some stuff in there I dislike a lot. So like, I absolutely get it.
Yep. 100%. Cool. So wrapping this thing up, going into a little bit of housekeeping. Caleb, do you have anything that you want to plug as we close this thing out?
No, because a lot of my personal creative work has been put on hold. You can still always follow me on Twitter/X, whatever you want to call it, CJ Van Ice. I got a promotion at work, so that's mainly what I've been doing lately is that. But yeah, nothing exciting to talk about at the moment. That's just follow me on Twitter. If anything happens that I can be like, hey, check out this thing I'm working on, that's where it'll be.
Makes sense. And for as far as our content, go follow us on YouTube. If you're like Caleb and you thought you were subscribed, but you're not, go double check.
Every time you guys posted a video, it would pop up in my feed and be like, oh, cool, they put a new video out.
And we have new stuff that comes out there every other week, like new YouTube videos. We also are posting the podcast there weekly as a video, so that's up there as well. If you enjoy the podcast, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts if you can. 5-star rating, all that helps us a lot. If you want to come hang out and chat with Caleb about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, hop in our Discord. That's the best place to do it. We're on X and Instagram and TikTok and a lot of those places, but like Discord is where the community is. It's where like you'll actually get engagement with us. We can have a conversation, stuff like that. So Discord is the place to be. There's a link in our podcast description. If you want to hear more from Caleb on the show, we talked about Final Fantasy VII Remake recently. We've talked about Kirby and the Forgotten Land. We've talked about Metroid Dread. I'm sure there's others that I'm not thinking of, but
I show up occasionally. I'll just be like, hey, Caleb, what are you doing this week? And if for some reason the answer is nothing, he's like, have you played this game? I'm like, yeah. Exactly.
We call in the old LPF crew whenever they seem to fit in, but we don't require them to be here weekly anymore is kind of the vibe. So yeah, if you want to hear more from Caleb, we have plenty of content where he has lent his voice. You've also been on like a lot of the Pod Fam
I have
content as well.
I need to go bother Jay because he asked me about something at the beginning of the year, and I was like, "Sure, yeah, just let me know." And I know because I've kept tabs on him that he's been doing with like 18 other things too. So I'm not saying he forgot about me, but I was like, "Did you still need me for that? Should I still be ready for that, or do you not need me?" Because I'm good either way. But
yeah, for sure. So with all that being said, this has been our Final Fantasy VII Rebirth episode. Thank you all so much for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode.